to the live stream. Thanks for joining us. Still in the glow, really, of the Miami Grand Prix. It was an amazing race, wasn't it? And there's a lot of talk now about the purists. You know, they've been shouted down. Nothing wrong with these regs. Equally, what was wrong with the regs has kind of been put half right, which is one of the reasons we had a good race in Miami, I think. And yeah, you know, I think the whole definition of purist or not has been thrown on its head. The thought occurred to me when I was chatting to Cameron, actually, in the bit earlier this week, in the wake of the Grand Prix, when we were talking about the potential for going away from electrification, really, with the new Formula One regs in 2030, 31, whatever it's going to be, and I was saying what a great thing. And he said, oh yeah, but Joe Saywood's been saying that that's a terrible thing because now 25% of the world's population use electric cars and Formula One must be going down that road. And it just occurred to me, well, that's a very purist view, isn't it? Talk about pure, you know, and suddenly, if I thought of myself as a purist, and maybe some of you do as well, suddenly we're the guys that want the show. In other words, we just want Formula One to be competitive, great race teams. Don't worry about the car companies. They can come and go as they please. But let's have good race teams like McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and let's make sure the racing doesn't get out of hand in terms of cost, which is kind of where we're at, or were. And I consider myself a purist, I guess, in the sense that when I'm looking at stats to do with a current driver, I always think, well, you know, the points are different, or more races, it was more dangerous back then, and somebody, well, you're a purist then, Peter, aren't you? But now, am I a purist for wanting the racing to be a show, as distinct from something that echoes what 30% of the world's population are doing with their road cars? So yeah, it's all up on their head, you know, and I thought it was a good race, Miami, and I'd love to see us go back to very little electrification on the cars, if any at all. And I'd like to see us, if we're going to do it, I'd like to see us going back to getting energy harvesting from the front axle more than anything, which is what Formula One is all about. It's all about braking. Tell me another category of racing in the world where there's so much emphasis on braking and how impressive, well, not this year maybe, but certainly up until the end of 2025. I mean, the braking of a Formula One car was always the most dramatic part of its repertoire. And that's kind of been taken away, but it's still very impressive today. Although I've got to say, here I am meandering a little bit already, but I've got to say, I thought it was very odd. I mean, with the Liam Lawson, Pierre Gasly thing, I jumped to the conclusion, I guess a lot of people did, that Liam had sort of just driven into him. And it wasn't that. And I have, you know, sorry, Liam, I've said so on the community page for our channel, which is hopefully, you know, read by some of you now, because it's, to me, it's replacing X. It's replacing all these other platforms. The community page on YouTube is really, really good. Anyway, he broke fifth gear under braking, which is very unusual. First of all, very unusual for a gear. It's a catastrophic failure of a gear. Maybe it was the dog rings, and we don't know. But all they said was he broke fifth gear, whatever that means, or fifth gear broke. He didn't necessarily break it himself. And that's, as I understand it, the same drivetrain as Red Bull A team. And those sorts of failures are very rare. I was talking to Mark Slade about it. And he said, well, yeah, I had one once with Michael at Mercedes when he broke a gear coming into the pit lane, actually, going down to the speed limiter. He said that's about the only time it ever happened. And it's very unusual for it to happen in a race like that. Anyway, that's the first point. But more oddly is that basically that then disconnected the car from its braking and its engine braking when that happened. So it would have been a complete shock to Liam, I guess, and everybody, and the engineers, everybody. But what seems odd is that he didn't then lock up the front brakes, from what I could see, because you would imagine that all the braking then would have been, not that there was much braking on the rear axle anyway, but you imagine then there would be a massive lockup. But there didn't seem to be. And I think that was why most of us just assumed he'd sort of driven into him. I'm confused by that point. I need to have another look probably at the replay to see if there is any lockup. But you would imagine the minute that happened, even if nanosecond that happened, that failure, even if he wasn't thinking about it, he would have been braking hard, probably, I guess, or just starting to brake. And all the braking would have gone straight to the front. Lock up City, Arizona, or Florida. And it didn't. That was very strange, very strange. Anyway, purists, Liam, got onto that tangent straight away. Now, Kimi Antonelli, wow, you know, what a thing. And if he had a month to possibly think about having one Grand Prix, two Grand Prix in a row, and it didn't change him at all. And he came back and he won Miami. So I don't think now things are going to change. Even when he gets to Europe, I think he's going to be pretty cast iron protected. And I think he's a strong guy anyway. I think he knows that it's not going to be, he's not going to keep winning if he starts becoming a star and believing all the stuff out there and falling for all the stuff inevitably that will happen to him in Italy. Although the thought occurs, being an Italian, if he gets the big offer from Ferrari at some point, let's say 2 years down the road, and he's won a world championship at Mercedes, it's going to be difficult for him to say no to it, isn't he? For an Italian to go to Ferrari and try to win a championship again, that would be pretty impressive, wouldn't it? Last Italian to win the Italian Grand Prix was what, Ludovico Scarfiotti, 66, I think. I'm probably not right there, but yeah, you know, there's a lot of history for Kimi to be looking at. Anyway, the other thing which I thought was very impressive about Kimi, and it's not really spoken about very much, is the way he wears his caps. I think that's very cool. Look at that, it's sort of perched on the back of his head, and he does that all the time. That isn't just a one-off of somebody knocking his cap as they were doing the presentation or anything. That is how he wears the cap. Impressive, I think. Now compare that with George, who's sort of very upmarket, Michael Schumacher-esque. I say Michael because Michael's the first guy I think that had the really perfect baseball cap positioning in his mind, and that sort of set the gold standard for everybody. But Kimi not. Look at that. You know, coming and doing his own thing. Obviously, there's a lot of hair going on, but nonetheless, he doesn't even think about doing a George with the cap. And where did Kimi get that from, do you think? Look at that, Nigel Mansell. I think that's 80, it's got to be, yeah, it's in the 90s, isn't it, with the Renault engine. But look at that, brilliant. And I've actually got one of those, Canon caps. They're made by Conti de Florence, which is a sponsor, a very cool sponsor, Italian, that Johnny Cicotto actually had. And Canon, who at that point was being run by Sean Pickering, a former shot putter, Olympic shot putter, somehow got Canon to do these. And they were a very odd shape, actually. It's a very odd shaped cap, which is possibly part of the reason that Nigel doesn't look particularly comfortable in it. But you know, it had the old Nigel signature on the side. It was a pretty nice thing, actually. Nicer to look at like this than actually to wear it. It never really sat comfortably on my head, I must say. But yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, that whole trend-setting thing of Kimi. And I suspect now we'll see more of the young drivers coming in and doing the Kimi Antonelli cap angle. Right, let's get down to some business. Your questions, which is of course the most important part of this show, as ever, inevitably. So you make the show. You know, who needs guests when we can have all you guys? So first question is from where have we gone here? 1 second, sorry, pressed the wrong button there. Anik Schilling. Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Hi, Peter. What is the problem with Montoya? Question mark. Why does he hate Max that much? Really? He never gives Max a positive comment. Well, I haven't heard Montoya doing any commentary or anything, so I can't really comment on what he may or may not have said. But if he was doing commentary for Miami, I can imagine that when Max did that 360, which was an amazing thing. I mean, it was just one of the most beautiful bits of car control I've seen for a long time, particularly in the middle of the pack, like, well, the front of the pack. And full credit to a lot of the guys that then missed him. Yeah, it wasn't just Max on his own, but nonetheless, you know, what an amazing save. It wasn't a save, but he just kept going, didn't he? Brilliant. But if you asked, I mean, Montoya is the last guy in the world I would ever ask about that, because Montoya has always thought of himself as the king of car control. And nobody out there could hold a slide better than Montoya when he was racing. That's according to Juan. And I guess since he's retired, he doesn't really like anybody coming in and exhibiting car control that might even be in his same planet. And so why would you ask Montoya his opinion of that? Because he was never a short corner driver. And he was all about long corners, getting the power on as early as possible and drifting the car and holding a slide, which he did incredibly well. And he was very good in traffic as well. but he wouldn't even begin to understand how Max drives, I wouldn't have thought. So why would you even talk to him about that? Because it's, I mean, if he didn't understand how Kimi drove when he was driving alongside Kimi at McLaren and what he needed to do to lift his game to take it to Kimi, then what chance is there if he's on the sidelines watching, understanding what Max does? So I'm surprised anybody's interviewing him about that and even talking to him, because you know exactly what he's going to say. I can imagine what he would have said about Max. What do you think about that amazing 360 of Max's? Oh, it's nothing, probably very lucky or something. He probably would have said, I don't know. But yeah, I think people need to stop asking other people what they think and just have their own opinion about things. We don't need to know what Montoya thinks or anybody else or David Coulthard. All we want to know is what happened, and we make our own mind up. We all know that was an unbelievable piece of car control and skill. End of story, you know. Why do people need to always have to get somebody else to make a comment? It's just, it's out of all proportion now, I think. If you're going to ask anybody, the only person that I would think would be remotely logical would be Jackie Stewart, actually, because he's seen so much. And he was pretty good himself. Anyway, that's my take on it all. Right, next one. Talk about jumping from one to another. Jez James says, the most courageous drive. Keke Rosberg, 1983 Monaco. Reason, beat the more powerful turbos in slippery conditions. Blistered hand from the gear change and throwing up in the crash helmet due to a virus. Really? I don't remember that bit. Maybe he was. Not very pleasant. Yeah, if you're going to beat the turbos in 83, Monaco was the place to do it, obviously, especially in the wet. So I don't think that was a massive feat. I mean, the turbos in the wet around Monaco were always going to be lapped, really. But no, Keke drove beautifully that day, and it was a wonderful, I mean, Daily Express trophy in the Theodore. He was incredible in the wet. And there he was at Monaco repeating that, really. And it's a shame we didn't see him win more wet races, because he was incredibly good in the wet. And it wasn't just all sideways car control. It was using his head and driving the car beautifully. I remember chatting to him after that Silverstone wet race, and he was saying he was just, whenever there was a car in front, he just made sure he was sitting on the little tracks left in the rain, the water, the standing water by the car in front. And that just made it a little bit easier. And that was it. But I drove with him in the wet once too, and he was one-handed virtually the whole lap. We were at Donington, and it was just like wheel one way, wheel the other way. Incredible opposite lock, and very, very smooth and supple. Very good, very good. And of course, that Monaco 83 was significant for another reason, which was that was the final moment of Mansour Ojeh deciding to leave Williams to go to McLaren. And we all know what happened thereafter. He financed the tag through his company. He financed the Porsche engine project for Ron Dennis, and look how that changed the world. And you could argue, you know, he was then went on to, well, I mean, Ron obviously by then had got the carbon chassis, but McLaren really took off, and then it was just a complete revolution with Mansour there as well, Mansour Ojeh. And here's the reason why Mansour, after that race with Charlie Crichton Stewart, his close advisor and friend, but nonetheless very close friend of Frank Williams as well, and doing all he could to try to persuade Mansour to stay at Williams. The the final thing was when Mansour borrowed an umbrella from Williams for the race, and Williams didn't get it back. Fair enough, you know, Mansour Ojeh, I mean, in the rush to get away from the track after the win, the odds of him actually, or anybody around him, oh yeah, must get their umbrella back to, you know, the Williams motorhome. So it got lost somewhere, nicked probably by someone. Anyway, a few days later, Mansour got an invoice from Williams for the umbrella. All right, that's enough. I've had enough of this. So there you go. Jez James again. Hi, Peter. Apparently the V8 is returning to Formula One by 31, according to the FIA president, Mohammed Ben, who confirmed the switch is happening. Well, yeah, I saw that he said something, but of course he is in no position to say what is happening. What that is him saying, well, this is, if it goes that way, I want everyone to know that I've kind of supported it. But it's got to go through Liberty. It's got to go through the teams. He can't just say these are the new regulations. It doesn't happen that way. I think that was a political stunt, not a stunt, statement. And I hope he's right. And I think a lot of other people hope he's right. But I don't think I don't personally think it'll happen. I think there are, well, depends who's owning Formula One's commercial rights at that point. That's still a long way away. 2031, when are we, 4 years? I mean, between now and then, Liberty could sell Formula One to somebody else. And and the next group may not be as and it may not be as I was going to say dictatorial, but that's the wrong word. They may not want to frame Formula One the way Liberty are framing it, and they may not be a media company for a start, and they may just be in it just to let Formula One get on with it and grow over a 4 or 5 year period, and then just sell it without having too much involvement. In which case, they may well go back to normally aspirated engines or ICE, whatever you want to call it. But well, they won't be normally aspirated, be turbo, I guess. But I don't think Mohammed's in a position to say that. It's not as I understand the rulemaking process. Anyway, Drew, last year Kimi charged me £972 for merchandise, so I'm judging him harshly. I think we're talking about Kimi Antonelli here. I can't imagine Kimi Raikkonen even having any merchandise, would he? Kimi's struggles are ahead. Here, the facts: 25. He was horrible at the Spanish, Austrian, British, Belgian, and Qatar Grand Prix. Next, 18th at Monaco, 16th at Zandvoort, 13th in Kota, 15th in Abu Dhabi, sadly 19th at Imola home. People grade him on a curve. I won't. I paid full price, no curve for my wallet. Kimi lives in Mistake City. Well, I think the first question is that why did you spend all that money on this guy who's not very, obviously in your opinion, not very good? It seems a bit odd. £972. This cap, well, this was free actually, because I helped Canon kind of put it together, so didn't pay much for that. What else? This is free. Yeah, well, not free. I mean, Jetcraft are a partner, so yeah, £972. Are you out of your mind? Why would you spend that much money on merchandising? Anyway, putting all that to one side, I think Kimi, as I said in the videos after Miami, I've said from day one that he's never been very good on medium and high speed corners, and all his skill level and results at the moment have all been related to how good he is on slow corners, when he's almost Max good. He's very, very good on slow corners. He's almost Alan Prost good on slow corners. Shortens them, lovely feel, suppleness, all the rest of it. And he's definitely been better than George almost from day one at Merck through slow corners. But I've always had my reservations, and I think that's shown in some of the results you're showing there, about whether that would ever translate to proper corners. But I do think it has now. I think it's been a sudden jump, and I think it's all related to winning races and having the confidence of knowing that he can go out there and take it to anybody in the world now, including Max. That's probably how he feels, quite correctly so, in the car and the team with which he finds himself. So I think now he can drive very, very well on medium speed corners and on high speed corners and change of direction and chicanes and medium speed chicanes. And I think he's a different driver now to how he was even in Melbourne. And that's no surprise. You start winning races and you win them well, and then you handle those wins well, and you do become more confident. And confidence is a very, very important factor. I know it's never included in any of the telemetry that engineers create around their drivers. It's never a factor, but it's incredibly important. And forget about confidence at your peril, because it has so many different effects on the way you drive and the way you use the car and use the tires and use everything else. So I think Kimi is a different driver now to how he was in Melbourne, and I think he's cracked medium and high speed corners. Well, certainly medium speed and change of direction as well, as we saw in Miami. High speed, okay, we haven't yet had a Pouin yet, so let's wait and see. George might still do him through Pouin, might do him maybe through Beckett's, possibly through Copse. I don't know. Well, we got a pretty good opportunity. Canada won't be much of a litmus test because there's not many great corners there. There's that quick right-hander if it's semi-wet after the first chicane, second chicane. First chicane, I think it is. Yeah, that right-hander. And that's quite a quick corner if there's not much grip there. But if it's dry, that'll be flat, I would imagine. Where else would you say was a quick corner in Canada? It's all stop-start chicanes. The last chicane, yeah, I mean, that's just... He'll be very good through there. But that's not going to be a real test for how he's going to go perhaps into the swimming pool at Monaco, although the swimming pool at Monaco is not as demanding as it used to be with all the curbs that it has now. Entry to Massenet, top of the hill, Monaco, Casino Square, maybe. Yeah, George probably possibly have him there. Although to be really quick there, you've got to be turning in quite early and extending the straight a little bit, center of left, sorry, left center of the road, which I don't imagine George is going to do there. Lewis has always been fabulous there, and I'm sure he still will be this year. Charles too, and obviously Max. So yeah, after that, fast, medium speed corners, what corners? By the time we get to Silverstone, I think he'll be there, I guess, is what you could also say. Leek Ambanga. So Max is going back to the 24-hour Nürburgring. Do you know how much people he's brought to that sport, including me? Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. And good luck to the Nürburgring people as well. I mean, I knew a guy, I've forgotten his name now actually, very nice guy, used to be media guy at Toyota, who when Toyota pulled out, he actually went to work for the Nürburgring, and I thought, oh, that's a bit funny. No, it didn't really. I mean, Robert Fernell used to go, great autosport journalist, ended up running Donington, didn't he? And so here we are at Nürburgring, and Patrick, his name was Patrick, can't remember his second name, and they knew what they had at the Nürburgring. And it was never called the Green Hell, by the way, when it was actually being used in Formula One. I don't ever remember anybody calling it that. It's a bit like all this business of Alan Prost was always known as the Professor. He was never known as the Professor. Or Luca Mondazemlo was known as Luca di Mondazemlo. It was always just Luca Mondazemlo. Anyway, all these things grow over time. It's only a very small point. So yeah, I mean, that's brilliant. Jack and I went up to the ring last year, and it was just amazing. We had lunch at this little cafe thing by the start of the lap, and it was just endless queues of people just paying their money to do the lap of the ring. And some of them are just specialists for doing that, and they all have their Porsches with the GPS rear wing and the whole thing, and that's what they live for. And so I was talking to some of them, 4 or 5 days a week after work. That's what they do. They just go and drive something quick around the Nürburgring, and then they go and have dinner with the family. So Max is going there, brilliant. Yeah, people going to the Nürburgring have totally in for it. The only thing I'm slightly nervous about are the number of people that might now want to race alongside Max, because you can actually go and do it. You can actually say to your mate or your partner, oh, I just raced with Max Verstappen in real life. And, you've got your slow, whatever it is, on the same grid. He's up there, you're back here. But nonetheless, the traffic is what I'm getting at. And I just hope Max knows all that. He doesn't need anyone like me to tell him that. But he needs to be leaving big margin all the time for slow back markers and people not really knowing what they're doing, especially if it's dark. Sarosh says, hi, Peter. I thought Leclerc and Max were equally spectacular throughout the race. Well, I totally agree with that, Sarosh. Thanks very much. One of our members, by the way. Brilliant. Was it the usual emotions getting the better of Leclerc, or was he driving a car with no grip at the limit and lost the feel? Well, I don't think he lost the feel. He just lost the grip. He still has feel when he has no grip. It's just that when he has no grip, it's just like, he's going to make more mistakes, and that's what happened. And yeah, that to me was the first. We've had a couple of sniffs of that, but that was the first real indication that Ferrari are kind of where they were last year, which is a pretty good car, and it should give them a win or two this year. But it is, on a straight fight, it's pretty hard on its tires, and that's what we saw. And yeah, Lewis, I think, had a similar issue. Well, I don't know if he did or he didn't. He just wasn't quick enough really to abuse the tyres that much. That was the thing. But then again, George did too, so it's not the end of the world for Ferrari if they want to relate it to George Russell. But if you relate it to Kimi, it was not good. And if you relate it to McLaren, it was not good. They used the tyres more. And so that'll be a worry for them. And I'm not sure this whole business of we go to high downforce, low downforce circuits, whether that applies anymore with the whole active aero thing any more than running wet settings applies anymore, as I was saying. Or as I said in the, I don't know if you've seen that. And before we do that, this is from Leek Kambanga, who's, thank you very much. This is a super chat and a member. Thank you so much, Leek. Max's accuracy with the GT car. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Mark Slade was at Brands at the weekend watching the GT3s and was very, very impressed by the noise they made as well. So that's a good thing. I'm sure Max enjoys that. Yeah, and front engine car, just jumping from a Grand Prix Red Bull RB22 into a GT3 Merc with all that bonnet in front of you, and then driving it on the limit. It's a big thing. It's a bit like Jim Clark going from a 1965 Lotus 33 Climax to a 4.5 litre Lotus 40, V8, ill handling Lotus 40. In just in the space of a day, which of course they all did in those days. So it's brilliant to see Max doing that. I'd love to see more drivers, as I've said many times, I'd love to see more drivers doing these things. Right now, for example, this is a perfect moment. This off weekend, it would be a perfect moment for Isaac Hadjar to race something, and something that's completely different to Formula One, just to get a bit of confidence back again, just to relax and enjoy his motor racing. But no, this is Formula One, not allowed to do that. Get ready, go to the sim, go to the gym, whatever. That's where they've got it wrong, I think. He should be out in some touring car somewhere, in some minor French event, blitzing the opposition, if possible, but just having fun apart from anything else. Or karting, or whatever. Maybe he is karting, I don't know. I shouldn't be too harsh on him. It's another one from Sarosh. Kimi was Prost-like, no load on the car at all. Don't know why. To me, I always get a feeling that he drives like Prost, Peter. My brain links up these two. Well, yeah, good. Go for it. I mean, there's certainly, I did actually say Prost, didn't I? Earlier on, he's very, very good into slow corners, always was. And now he's starting to look that way. He looked that way compared with Lando when they were out together in the back half of the race, nose to tail for a while, when Lando was in a position to win that race, and there was Kimi just asking less of the car, less of the tires, shorter corners, more. I mean, the way he was initiating the steering input compared with Lando, who's pretty good compared with Oscar, was just fabulous. The transitions he was doing, you could barely, it was just a seamless thing from straight line to initial steering. Just beautiful to watch. In that little bit there, you could really see how good Kimi has become. And Prost was always like that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think he's got a bit more. I mean, Prost at the beginning of his career was very like Kimi, very, very presumptuous and able to, do things. He could carry a mountain when he was at the first stage of his career. In that first year at McLaren, I hesitate to call him fearless, because I don't think Prost ever was fearless, but he was somewhere near that. And I think John Watson was kind of, whoa, this guy's unbelievable, the things he does. But then, of course, later on, when he raced alongside Niki Lauda, he started to get the feel of how to win championships from Lauda, which was, don't touch anything, don't hit anything, and don't let anybody hit you. And once Prost had that in his head, obviously he backed away from a couple of areas. He's still quick, very quick in races, but I think he changed then. But early on, he was fabulous. And Kimi eventually will find some sort of ceiling, which will be the one at which he can win world championships and races on a consistent basis. And yeah, he's doing such a good job, though, isn't he? Really good. Dennis Castaneda. I think they're a failure to FIA, not racing anymore. Really? I thought the racing was pretty good, actually. Depends what you define by racing. There were a few dodgy overtakes, which were all to do with power here, power there in the early phase of the race. And Lando, I mean, there's a good example. Lando had the power, the overtake thing, and he couldn't do anything with it. So that's quite good, actually. I like it when you can't do anything with it, and you can say, well, that's just because Lando doesn't drive as well as Kimi Antonelli with a lighter fuel load on the hard tyre. Kimi was just doing a better job of not touching the edge of the tyre of performance. He was just so seamless in everything he did, whereas Lando wasn't. And that was the difference. If Lando just blasted past and won the race, we'd all be saying, oh, Lando, the magnificent. But I think, that sense, the regulations were just about spot on there, to be honest. Zavej Dougal, again, Russell was a car length ahead of Kimi at the start of the sprint, but still managed to get out-braked by him and losing the place. Why did he let it happen? That was not a championship weekend by Russell. No, it wasn't. It was a pathetic weekend by Russell. If he's, arguably one, if not the best driver in the world, about to win the world championship in the best car and the best team with the most experience, it was a terrible weekend. I mean, that was Jackie Stewart joining BRM in '65 and dominating Graham Hill even more than he did. I mean, Graham bounced back pretty quickly after Jackie won Silverstone Daily Express Trophy and won Monaco, one of his best drives ever. And Graham put in some other fabulous drives as well. But Jackie, Jackie was there and we all knew therefore how good he was. But Graham Hill put up a strong fight against Jackie Stewart in the way that George Russell is not. And there's a similarity there because they're very similar cars, similar level of competitiveness as well, that BRM that year. And there are many other examples as well. But, George Russell just basically turned over and let himself just get beaten by a teammate. And as I said at the start of my video on Sunday night, all the superlatives will be out there about Kimi and all the historical facts, all of which are relevant. But the most significant of all is how he blew George Russell away in the same car. And he's done it 3 times in a row, basically. And that's the thing. When you start beating your teammate like that, it's a big deal. Now, of course, there's every reason to think George will come back in Canada, but there's no reason to think Kimi will be slow in Canada. That's the point. And if they finish first and second, George ahead of Kimi, that's no bad result for Kimi Antonelli, because Canada is it's not a particularly demanding circuit. It's just a circuit that George will be going there now on a mission, and he'll probably do a very good job there in a very good car. And it'll be right, I'm asserting myself. But wait till you get to Monaco, That's going to be more difficult for George there, for sure. Canada won't be in any way a discerning race, I think, in terms of defining the speed, the relative speed and abilities of those two right now. Savage continues, Norris for his 2nd World Drivers' Championship. Wow, I'm calling it now. He will win this year. My reason is McLaren, a great team with great unity and talent. Best team on the grid at the moment. Really? Okay. Yep, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not sure that I think Lando's going to win, and I'm not sure that I agree that they're the best team in terms of unity and talent. I would say, what does that mean? I mean, to me, a race team is a race team, and whether it's whether it has lots of stars, or whether it's homegrown talent, or whether it's one person dominating it that makes it a great race team, all those things are kind of part of the building blocks. The reality is, how good is the race team? At the moment, I still think Red Bull is a pretty good race team, a better race team than Ferrari for sure, and as good a race team as Mercedes, I think. But anyway, McLaren, I still think, and I may be wrong here, and I'm feeling as if I'm wrong as a result of Miami, that Oscar Piastri should and could, if there's a McLaren driver going to win a championship, it should be him. He is good. We know how good Oscar is, but we didn't see that in Miami. We saw it in Suzuka, but we didn't see it in Miami. And that was very disappointing for anybody that wants to see Oscar out there. Now, what you have at McLaren is 2 long corner drivers, one of whom is a bit more supple and soft and rhythmic, that's Lando, than the other. But the other does have a feel for getting in the corner a little bit earlier, a little bit like Sebastian Vettel, and that's Oscar Piastri. But when you have those 2 guys, it's very difficult, I think, to be at the absolute limit. And to me, they did not qualify particularly well, either of those 2 drivers, in the variables that came into play. And I think the McLaren was better than it looked in qualifying, and one of them should have been on the front row. That's my feeling. And I think that over a season, that will potentially add up. In other words, just to put it in a nutshell, I think both McLaren drivers are reactive drivers. They react to what the car and the conditions around are doing, whereas a Max or a Charles, and I've got to say now a Kimi, manipulate the car and manage the car around the variables. And they're still driving on anticipation rather than reaction. And that is still the quickest way to be as a racing driver. There's only about 4 or 5 guys in the world that can do that. But that is the epitome of the art. It's withstanding the variables. And I think when you saw all the variables coming into play in qualifying, both McLaren drivers backed away because they had moments, and then they drove under the moment in order to get the lap in. And that will, I think, will always be a problem for them. Why McLaren chose two guys that way, I've no idea, but they did. Ronnie Way. Hi, Peter. Hope you've rested well the past few days. I think so, yeah. Haven't stopped, really. Don't know what I've been doing. A lot of golf going on. We're going up to the DP World Tour event in Barcelona this weekend, which should be good. Got some friends playing in that tournament. Be out there following them. And Jack will no doubt be picking up a lot of tips from them. Anyway, one on the undercut. Could you expand on how it may not matter as much because of the various new tools? Is still energy harvesting on these less downforce cars, and FIA thinking of trimming it down to the current because of the team's aero improvements complicating? Yeah, thanks. Well, it is complicated, that's for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think, I think there's always an advantage. If it's advantageous to pit stop first for tyres, it's always an advantage if you get it right. I'm not saying that that isn't the case. All I'm saying is I don't think it's as big a disadvantage if you get it wrong, or if you want, as I think McLaren correctly did in Miami, to extend the stint for as long as possible because there's a possibility of rain and you want to be able to chime in your pit stop with the rain. And I think they made the right call in that respect. And I don't think in Miami it was that big a disadvantage. And I think despite the pit stop being a little bit longer than it should have for Lando, and despite him being undercut, I think he could have won that race. I think he had a race-winning car. And we saw it with the pace that he had as he caught Kimi after the pit stop. He caught him pretty remorselessly. Now, we've always said, and we've made it clear that if you're the leader, obviously the tyres are going to be in better shape. You've got the debris, you've got the turbulence, everything else affecting and potentially increasing the temperature for the tyres for the guy behind. But this is my point. There are now more tools for the driver to use in that position than we've ever had before in Formula One. And we saw that at the start of the race when things were different. Obviously, they were on different tyres, fuel loads were different, but there was a lot of toing and froing at the front. And I think Lando left it too long, which he often does. You know, he waits for the perfect moment, or he waits for the guy in front to make a mistake that he's never going to make. And he's done that time and again, a lot of times. And, you know, if it was a driver like, say, Max, or even Kimi for that matter, now I think you get, if you're catching somebody and then you've got them and you're within your half a second, bang, you go, you pounce. You don't wait 4 or 5 laps to see now what's going to happen. Where's he quick? Where's he slow? Where am I going to get him? Is he going to make a mistake here? By the time you do that, yeah, your tyres have gone. So I don't think that was a great example of what I'm saying, because I think Lando should have won that race. And, you know, I don't think I'll ever change my mind on that unless somebody's got new evidence that I don't know about. But to me, he should have won that race. And that's a good example of how the undercut is no longer as significant as it used to be. And I wonder whether the strategy teams of all the Grand Prix outfits have actually factored that in. I doubt it myself, because they tend to be fairly straitjacketed in the way they look at things. And the undercut has always been a big deal because it's an easy thing to see, to measure. The fans can understand it. It's a thing that's been in Formula One for a long time now, and people love it. But I think it's overrated. And I think it's overrated, particularly for the reasons I've just said. As Savage says, if a driver feels the car through his fingertips, what other areas do they use? Back, feet, head, backhand? And do different drivers prefer different setups depending on where they feel the car? I can only speak from experience here. And remember, the piece I did about fingertips was I did actually say that many drivers have different feels, different wants with the steering wheel thickness, thinness, the shape of the wheel, shape of whatever it is they're holding. And there is no hard and fast rule on what is good and what is bad. What I did say was that it's interesting that the great drivers tend, not all of them, but they tend to feel the steering wheel through the thumb and forefinger before any other part of the hand, or as much as any other part of the hand. So that's, and I put up a picture of Charles Leclerc, just a picture from, I think from Miami, on the community page showing exactly that. You can see he's turning into a right-hander, I think it is, and you can just see him doing that. He's just holding all his field for the hands anyway. But in terms of the rest of his body, yeah, I mean, spoken over the years to a lot of drivers, and it's the shoulders, it's the small of the back, it's under the thighs, it's obviously the feet, which is mainly the pedals, but when you brace your left foot on the left, you get quite a lot of feel there as well. Yeah, it's, what can I say? It's every part of the body, and you have to feel a part of the car. Do drivers prefer different setups depending on where they feel the car? I mean, I don't think there's a lot of difference, and the setup. First of all, the seat fitting is for comfort and not feeling any sort of crinkle that might hurt during the course of a race when they're heavily strapped into the car. And as I said before, Jacques Villeneuve was one of the few drivers that almost impossible to get him comfortable in the seat because he used to wear such baggy overalls. And there was always an increased wrinkle or crinkle by the time he got the belts up. There was always a wrinkle somewhere in his overalls, which over a period of time would be a problem. And then he'd come back and want another seat fitting. And that's why very tight, as tight an overall as you can get is quite a good thing, because you've got more chance of being absolutely comfortable in the seat then. Different setups depending on where they feel the car. Well, it would be fascinating to know what Red Bull have adjusted for Max going from Japan to Miami to make him feel more comfortable with the setup in the cockpit, whether that's just steering wheel or whether there's some other things as well. It being a new car, whether it be a bit of padding here or just get a little bit out of the bulkhead there, whatever it was, cockpit height, whatever. Be fascinating to know. But there's always, I mean, it's a little bit like setting up a car for a lap. There are some drivers who are very good at feeling a glitch in a car and describing that to an engineer and getting that glitch out so that then it becomes an easier car to drive. But guess what? They haven't got any quicker. And they're just driving a glitch-free car. Whereas there are other drivers who know that there's a glitch there, but that glitch is there because that's giving him the traction that he needs, for example. And he's not going to complain about that glitch because he can innately feel that that's part of what he needs in order to be quick on this section of road. And it's a little bit like that with setup, I think, that there are some things you can do that make it more comfortable, but you won't affect performance. But then when a guy like Max says, I need this here because my right leg I've got too much angle between the thigh and the hamstring, and I need to make sure that I've got slightly less there. Then when I'm in this sort of corner and I'm on that amount of throttle, I've got that amount of feel coming from the side of my leg. The engineers think, okay, we need to do that because that's what he needs. That's what we'll do. And I'm only just guessing here, but I would suspect that anything Max says, he's absolutely spot on, and he knows exactly what he needs in order to be faster in the setup of the car. It's pretty templated now, but obviously in terms of the arrangement of the steering wheel, which, you know, I can't even begin to think about what that's like in terms of it being a computer screen. You know, it's too complicated for words. And I would imagine Max just wanted to simplify things rather than change them around and move them and get rid of some stuff that he didn't need, or they could add it to something else if they really needed to do it in the middle of the race and eliminate a few of the buttons and things he has to press. I would guess it's probably that, but I may be wrong. I'm ready to be wrong for sure on that. Aaron, hi Peter, do you think an active aero should be a permanent addition to Formula One? I don't know if it makes any difference at all, does it? I suppose if it wasn't there, what would they be going slower in a straight line? But it doesn't seem to be anything like as important now as overtake boost. But I suppose, you know, if one of the effects of active aero is that it's no longer worth taking a gamble on a dry qualifying day to run more rear wing because you think it's going to be rainy on Sunday, if because of active aero that's no longer a risk worth taking, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because what we don't want is somebody like Max doing that at Spa and then all his advantage nullified because they delay the start of the race. But whether that's just because of active arrow or also because of the, the power and stuff they're doing and the deployment and the harvesting, I don't really know. It's all too complicated for me. But it seems, I mean, Mark was saying it does seem to be the case that it's no longer going to be worth that gamble. And that was all as a result of James Hinchcliffe apparently saying that he felt the McLarens were slow in qualifying because they were running a wet setup. But what wet setup? If it's not rear wing, what would that have been? I mean, you can adjust the ride height, the front flaps, the brake ducts anyway if it's wet. So what else would they have run? But it can only be rear wing. But as we're saying, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. They don't seem to need to do that. Maybe on higher speed circuits they might. I don't know. Maybe have more effect. Here's another super chat. Thank you very much from Sharabil. Bono and the team doing exceptionally well. They are, that's another thing with Kimi. I mean, he couldn't have a better guy than Bono, really, could he? Pete Bonington. And he's been there a long time now and knows his way, learned a lot from Lewis, no doubt, and keeps calm. And he's just well synced. Be interested to know whether Bono is going to the whole Kimi cap situation now as well. Nigel, Kimi. Interesting. I doubt it, knowing Bono. Not that I know him very well, but knowing how he is, sort of. And now, Arshad Chowdhury. What was causing the drivability issues? How come Max started to enjoy the car more and show his skills with the regulation tweak? I don't think it was drivability. It was cockpit comfort. All the things I've just been talking about. I think it was the architecture of some of the Duvanakis that he can play with on the steering wheel and around him, and maybe eliminating some of them, just making it less complicated so he could just drive the car. I'm only guessing, as I say here, but we'll try and find out as time goes on exactly what did happen there. But I think it's that, and I don't think, obviously they made aero changes like everybody else, floor, side pods, coat on the side of the engine, the whole thing, brake ducts, but I don't think they did anything about drivability as such in the old sense of the word, or the drivetrain sense of the word, or the throttle or the turbo lag sense of the word. I think it was all to do with cockpit stuff. But in terms of pace, it was aero. There were a lot of aero improvements, and the Red Bull was a better car for sure. And then on top of that, less power means that there are fewer places now when Max is just sitting there not able to be Max Verstappen, and he can start to play around a little bit with deployment and how he can best use it. Given the way he drives and the things he can do with the car, what he maximizes now in terms of where he deploys and where he harvests might be different from where, say, George Russell is. And that's something else that's coming into play, that drivers, if they're good enough at that level, might start to be doing it in slightly differently from the pro forma way the engineers are saying this is the best way to, most efficient way of harvesting the power over the lap. Max might think to himself, yeah, okay, but if I do that there, and he wouldn't necessarily even talk about that, I wouldn't have thought. He would just do it. Or maybe he'd just do it with his engineers and just get on with it. And I suspect there's a bit of that with less power now that needs to be generated. I think that's made that more of a proposition. And there were turn one, I think that section initially, he wasn't brilliant there, but he was very good sectors 2 and 3. And so if you take that twiddly bit in the middle of sector 2, where Hajar went off, that's a place where Max now probably, compared with the regs as they were prior to Miami, he's able to do more with the car now going in, and that's a good thing. But having said that, turn 4, which is obviously sector 1 bit, he was off the throttle and the car was just cruising, and he wasn't able to be Max Verstappen. So there's still areas where he's just being another racing driver. But there were more. I would say it's probably gone up. Look to me, guess number 30%, it's gone up. The number of corners now where Max can start to play around and do some things and some funky things and do well. That's what it looks like. I'm plucking numbers out of the sky, but then why not? Because we're not being given any numbers, and the teams are never going to give us that info anyway. So it's just all we can do is supposition. Alessandra Durango, another regular, thank you very much. Hi there. Hi, Peter. After the latest reg changes, we're starting to see those gaps between teammates opening up again. What do you expect from Canada? Is it a track where we might see significant differences as well? No, I don't. I think it'll be the other way. I think we'll see the differences between teammates actually close in Canada, because I don't think there are as many discerning corners or places that will allow the thing I've just been describing, a Max, to say, I'm going to do that slightly different. I'm just going to try now if we deploy here and see what happens, which is not the way Isaac Hadjar would necessarily be thinking at this stage of his career. And I don't think there are many places in Canada where you could do that. I think it's, if in terms of, this is the engineer in the debrief or the pre-brief saying, this is what you need to do for the most efficient deployment of energy around the lap. And if you go away from that, you're going to be slow. I suspect that's what will happen. There are no grey areas in Canada, and it's all, there's a lot of straight line stuff. The engine's on full power for, well, in theory, on full power for a long time. And it's, high speed braking, obviously, judgment, all that precision, but all the drivers are pretty good at that. And yeah, I don't think there'll be a lot of difference between Hadjar and Max around Canada, assuming they both have equal runs in terms of mechanical reliability. And as I say, I think George is quite capable of being quicker than Kimi in Canada. And Lewis will be up there with Charles, I would have thought. So, yeah. And Liam and Arvid is a good example. Arvid will probably be quite near Liam, I would have thought, maybe even ahead of him. Yes, Max to MB, says Barry. Well, maybe. I mean, everybody wants Max to leave Red Bull, don't they? They keep banging on about it for 3 years. Oh, is Max going to leave Red Bull? Got to go to Mercedes, Toto, blah, blah, blah. Why is everybody so obsessed with Max going to Mercedes? Why do they want that? Well, do they want it? I don't know. They just think he might. Now it's a difficult thing, isn't it? He'd be alongside Kimi, which would be, I'm sure Max in his own mind going to bed at night would think, yeah, it'd be good for me. I'd love to have Kimi in the other car. He's a good bloke, quick driver, both similar people. We like similar things, whatever he thinks, when they're having their spaghetti in Monaco by the marina there. But he's going to have to say goodbye to a Red Bull that may be winning Grand Prix this year. And that's a big thing. Let's wait and see. It's not, the year is by no means long enough yet for Max to be able to say, yeah, I got to get out of this place and get into a better team. He hasn't got to that point yet. M.A. Khan, Peter, what is Kimi doing to George that Lewis was unable to do? Any particular areas where he stands out? Well, the sad thing is there, of course, that had Lewis won the World Championship in Abu Dhabi 21 and had the Mercedes in 22 been a very quick car, then I think you would have seen Lewis doing to George what Kimi's doing to George. But that wasn't what Lewis was in 2022 and beyond. He was a shattered, shocked guy as a result of Abu Dhabi 21 psychologically. And remember what I was saying earlier about confidence. And second, he was a guy that didn't want George in the other car anyway, because he liked having Valtteri as a teammate. And thirdly, the car was horrendous and he'd never driven a thing like it in his life. Bouncing all over the place, flick oversteer, unstable rear, blah, blah, blah. And he just he wasn't there to push George hard, really, unless the car was pretty well balanced and set up. And George then did a very good job, being the young gun that he was, fearless young gun, and drove a pretty bad car very well. Probably as well as Kimi would have driven it today. But now we're in a different situation, which is that the car is very, very good. And George has come out of this period of being king of the heap at Mercedes without really having changed as a driver and therefore developed as a driver. Yes, more experience for sure. That just comes naturally, organically. What I'm talking about is the things that were never great on George. In other words, seamless transitions or general suppleness, shorter corners. Those things were not there. And they remained throughout the last 3 or 4 years not there, because he didn't need to delve deep. And now all of a sudden, Kimi's arrived, and the George that he's racing against is the George that was just as good as he was 3 or 4 years ago in terms of technique, not in terms of experience, but in terms of technique. And Kimi is bringing in some technique that George has never seen, because I suppose he saw it in 21 from afar, with Lewis when he was test driver, but not really knowing what he was seeing, I guess, because nobody would have been talking to him about it within the team. But basically Kimi is now driving as well as Lewis ever drove, I think. Maybe not in a couple of areas, but somewhere near there. So that's the difference. The parallel actually is Fernando going to McLaren in '07 and suddenly finding, not that he was looking for it or indeed would ever acknowledge it even today, a young rookie in the other car who was doing things better than he was in a number of significant areas. And Fernando just couldn't handle that. And that's why he started to blame the team and wanted different brakes and all this and that, because it wasn't, it wasn't anything he'd had to face before in his life. Jarno truly a little bit, but he very quickly, Jarno very quickly was moved out of the team, and that was that. Everybody else, Fernando had always eaten for breakfast. And it's a little bit like that. I don't think George has ever had anybody, well, he hasn't. He's never had anybody this quick in the other car. When he was at ART, I mean, Jack Aitken pushed him a little bit, and Jack was pretty good in a couple of areas. But George, oddly, was always better on time management than Jack, I always felt, and made the tyres magically last longer than Jack could. And now his time management's not very good, is it? Well, it's not very good. Wasn't very good at Miami, that's for sure. And so, yeah, there we go. Sachin Seshadri. PPL make too big a fuss of driver mistakes these days. People make too big a fuss of driver mistakes these days. I think error rate of modern drivers is lower. Plus, we have more races. I remember Schumi and Mika crashing at Champions Wall more frequently. Do they make a big fuss of driver mistakes? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Are you referring to me? Do I make a big fuss about it? I don't. I mean, I've been saying how brilliant it was to watch Max doing what he did. And I've said always that, drivers make mistakes. They're human. But it's the drivers like Max and Charles who are manipulating cars that can get out of situations more gracefully and more often than reactive drivers. I know Charles didn't do as good a job as Max when he lost it, but it wasn't bad. But we've seen other drivers at the other end of the spectrum, back end goes, and the next thing they're in the wall. But Max, I mean, it's not just about hitting the brakes. It was about exactly the perfect moment to hit the brakes and the perfect use of the steering to get the car to do the 360. So anybody that thinks or says that was just luck, that doesn't know what they're looking at, in my opinion. That was just a really, really good bit of driving. We ought to have more of that. We ought to have, but you ought to be a bit like rallying, I think. The drivers ought to go to the big downtown city centres of every Grand Prix, and it should all be a public area, and they should all be in, I don't know, GR Yaris's, and they should all have to do donuts and reverse parking and all this stuff. It'd be good, wouldn't it? And that should be a little mini championship in its own right, because there's so much talent there, and we don't often get to see it. And as you say, a lot of people love to jump on them when they're making mistakes, but obviously, that is a good time to watch great drivers when they're making mistakes, and I love it. Hi, Peter. Can you tell us some of the mind games Nelson would play with Nigel? What was the atmosphere like within the team then? Love your show. Well, of course, it was not very difficult to wind up Nigel, sadly. Bless him. And he was very easy to read, very easy to read. And so, bear in mind the motorhomes were very cozy in those days, or the back of the garage, wherever the debrief was taking place, or the briefing with Patrick and or Frank. And, it would only take, I mean, if Nelson had won the previous race, he'd make a point of having Autosport open for the briefing in front of him with the front cover glaring in Nigel's face. That was a classic Nelson thing. He loved hanging out with the top Honda people whenever Nigel was around, sort of making Nigel think that Nelson, was cooking up something special with Honda. He'd always do that. He was always late if they were doing a joint driver thing with sponsors. Nelson would always turn up late, which used to drive Nigel mad because he was always early for everything and spot on time, always. And so that drove him mad as well. But, once Nelson had done that interview with Playboy Brazil, he didn't really need to do much more to wind up Nigel. All he needed to do was just be in the same, you know, vicinity, and Nigel would be wound up by Nelson. And just as a, well, I'm not even going to say repeat what he said, but he said something very nasty about Nigel's wife Roseanne in that interview, and that was, you know, ridiculously bad, and he should never have done that. That was unconscionable. And that was it. You know, that happened in '86, I think. So that was the relationship gone. And then I think also, you know, it was obvious that Frank was much more comfortable hanging out with Nelson and chatting with Nelson, having a giggle with Nelson, having a laugh with Nelson, even post-accident. And so also, you know, Nelson would do that. You know, he'd love to show Nigel that he was Frank's chosen one, sort of thing. There was, and Nelson it wasn't difficult to do that, really. I mean, Nelson was a charming guy if he wanted to be, and always laughing. And Frank Durney, I think, his engineer, loved all that. No, don't say he loved all that. He was an engineer, so he wasn't that political, but he definitely got swept along in that. And I don't think Frank Durney was ever a massive Nigel fan or believer that Nigel was super quick in the way that, say, David Brown was at Williams subsequently. And so I think Frank Durney also sort of exacerbated that whole business of winding up Nigel too, and would often say things like, I remember him saying, you know, first time Nelson drove in the test at Ricard, back end of '85, maybe early '86. He's still in a 10, and Frank came back and said it was just unbelievable to work with a driver that doesn't hit the curbs anymore. No curbs at all. I mean, it was just, never worked with a driver so smooth, so good. All this in front of Nigel, you know. So guess what? When it came to the race, Nelson was using the curbs just like everybody else. Anyway, yeah, they were a lot of the things that Nelson did. Anyway, Nelson was a funny guy. I mean, he had his motorbike, and he had Catherine, his girlfriend, and he backpack, and you know, long before backpacks were fashionable, Nelson had the backpack. And I remember once when answer phones came into vogue, and he had a boat, and he was on the boat at Monaco, and I was trying to get hold of him for something, and he left a message for a friend on his outgoing message, which the outgoing message is supposed to be, "Hi, this is Nelson, leave a message after the tone," right? His said, "Hi, this is Nelson. Jimmy, where are you? I'm waiting for you. Here, I'm here. When are we going to have lunch?" That was the outgoing message. That's why Frank loved him, I think. There you go. So all for one says, why has Max got to go to Mercedes? Stay at Red Bull and win again. Yeah, I agree, kind of, you know. A DBY90. Hey, Peter, what's your take on McLaren dominating the sprint but not taking that momentum through to qualifying race? Well, as I say, in qualifying, I don't think that either driver, I think both drivers backed away from the conditions and drove under the conditions to get the laps in, and didn't get the best from the car. They didn't drive a Charles or a Max lap or a Kimi lap in qualifying. And I think the car was better than it looked in qualifying. And McLaren are very good always of never blaming the drivers. It's always, oh, we didn't get the best from the car here, or, you know, oh, look, we messed up with the undercut with Lando in the race. You know, there's no point in talking to any of the senior people after the race, because you know what they're going to say. They're never going to say, yeah, you know, the undercut, yeah, okay, but what was Lando doing for 5 laps, sitting behind him, just doing nothing? They're never going to say that, are they? You can imagine them saying that. They never would. So that was that. And then the race, I think they had a great car in the race. I think they should have won it. I don't think it was any difference. I think it was just drivers, to be honest. Put another way, if McLaren's drivers were Max and Charles, I think they would have been on the front row and they would have won the Grand Prix. Zishan Afsar. Sorry, mate. I know I'm fumbling there. Peter, what did you make of Sainz's comments in the race about Max and how he was racing the midfield? Do you think Max's overtakes are over the limit, or is he just not afraid to get his elbows out? Didn't hear Sainz's comments about Max and how he was racing the midfield. Was he critical of Max being aggressive? Do you think Max's overtakes are over the limit? No, I don't. I think he shows up because he's very, very good at track craft and being forceful and going for the moment and not faffing around. And a lot of them are after you, Claude, wait for the moment. Oh, I've got understeer, oversteer. Max just goes for it. There are not many drivers in the world that, in the history of the sport, that have been like that. I'd say Jochen Rindt was one. Nigel Mansell was another. Gilles Villeneuve was one. Fernando Alonso to some extent, although I'm not quite sure what this year's going to do to his way he thinks. But I think Max, accept Max and enjoy it. I mean, Carlos Sainz, he's pretty aggressive himself, isn't he? Or does he think everybody should just wait their turn these days? I don't know. Carlos is in no position really to talk about anything because he must be so eaten up inside about A, being sacked by Ferrari, and B, then going to Williams instead of Audi, that he must be just not enjoying any aspect of his racing at the moment and must be looking forward to playing golf and having fun with his dad in a Dakar car. So there you go. Don't take much. You probably gathered over the years that I don't actually put much store in what a lot of people say because they're always going to state the obvious, aren't they? It's a bit like that business earlier on. Montoya doesn't like Max Verstappen. Well, you don't have to like the guy to rate him as one of the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time, which he is. And if you can't see that, why make a comment in the first place? Go and talk about something else. Andre Bastancho. What did Franco do differently this weekend? Best of his career. I know. Bizarre, isn't it? I've been very critical of Franco Colapinto over the last couple of years because he's a very, very long corner driver, still is, and just puts the power on at the last minute, the first possible millisecond that he can find when he can just be sure he's got a rear. But by then, half the corner's over, and and what happened here? I think it's obviously a very good car, the Alpine now, as we predicted, and even more of a shame for Williams that they're not up there with them, at least with Alpine. With the Mercedes, they've adapted very well to the Mercedes powertrain, haven't they? Good on Steve Nielsen and the boys. The boys include Flavio Briatore? Don't know, really. But certainly Steve should get a lot of credit for that, I think. But just a man management and putting the package together. Very good. Colapinto, it seems to me that the Alpine doesn't have quite as much grip as a McLaren, Mercedes customer car, or certainly the Mercedes factory team. And probably the way to drive one of those cars pretty quickly is the way he drives. It's just get the thing in a straight line, get all your harvesting perfect, get the power on as soon as you can, nice wide, long corner, see the apex, blah, blah, blah. And I guess Gasly was playing a bit more with the front of the car where there's not a lot of grip on that Alpine yet, not as much as, say, a Red Bull or certainly a McLaren. And it was costing him. So I think obviously Colapinto went well and drove well, and he found that groove, that sort of Carlos Sainz-like groove, and did a very, very good job with it. But to me, it looked as if Gasly was underperforming, and there was something about the car that he just couldn't hook up at all around Miami. He was making mistakes, and he didn't look good in the car, in my opinion, which is very unusual for Pierre Gasly. So I think it was a bit of Franco finding with the grip level he had, which was good, lots of grip from the Pirellis. Obviously, the Alpine was working with that. The less power means he was able to be more on top of the car. His long corners were working because he wasn't making a lot of mistakes, and he was getting the tires to work really well and gaining more confidence as a result. That's not really an explanation, is it? Kind of. I don't know, really. He's always going to be a long corner driver, I think. So we shouldn't get that excited about him. I don't think he's as good as Bortoleto from what I can see, and certainly not in the Isaac Hadjar class in terms of shortening the corner. But Isaac's got other things, not the least of which are, he's a very emotional guy, isn't he? Cameron has just come up with a ridiculously expensive super chat. Thank you so much, mate. That's very kind. Totally unnecessary, but thank you very much. Cameron in the building. Blessing Peter. Nice. Max Flashheart says legend. Very good. Thank you. Excellent. Who will win the title, Russell or Kimi? I still think it'll be George, actually. I think George will start to win. I think he'll probably win quite a lot of races in the summer. And I think his long-term experience will add up over the year. And if you're going to have this sort of kick in the pants from a guy like Kimi, it's better to have it at the start of the year when you can recover from it. A bit like Lando last year with Oscar, rather than, in the middle of the year when you're panicking, you don't know what's going on. So I would say George. I don't know how Kimi's going to lose it. That's another point. But the gut feeling is George, I guess. Savage said, Montoya said Max should get 8 penalty points for speaking out against the 26 regs because he's too harsh. He should be more grateful for the sport. Don't know why he would say that. Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for people like Max speaking out against the regs, we wouldn't have the regs we have now. So what is Montoya on about? I mean, why is Montoya suddenly being quoted by people? I mean, go away. I mean, his son's doing very well, needs a bit of help. Look after him. I think he's quite good at golf still, isn't he? And tennis or whatever he does. What is he doing talking about Max Verstappen? I don't get it. Jack Craft, Vampire. Wow. That's a great name. Jack Craft, there you go. Hi, Peter. Very nice to have that. Thank you. Life of Bree 1424. Hi, Peter. Love your analysis. Likewise with Cameron. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. With regards to Liam, I heard him comment that it went neutral when the gear broke, making it difficult to stop. Well, yeah, I mean, that's what would have been the effect. He would have lost all engine and rear axle braking, as little as that is, but he would have lost everything from the rear, and it would have felt as if he was going into neutral. Complete shock to him, I imagine, because he would never have, in a million years, you'd never expect to feel that. Whether that was actually neutral, I mean, it was neutral in the sense that he wasn't in a gear because the thing broke. I don't know, maybe the end sign came up, I don't know, but maybe that's why I wasn't locking the front brakes. Was he looking at the dash? I don't know. I just find it odd that because it wouldn't have affected the front brakes at all. Well, surely. Or am I wrong? Jack Craft Vampire says, wishing you excellence in the field of mental health and awareness. Thank you. Thank you very much. Peter, did the clerks, this is Zishan Asfar, did the clerks race sum up his career at Ferrari? Let's not read into it too much. I mean, it was a bad day at the office. And give him full marks for doing the old Gilles Villeneuve at the end, didn't he? With a broken left front suspension, unable to go into right-handers. He still does the lap. Yeah, got the penalty. Didn't really matter, though. Put on a show for the crowd. I imagine, in the old coffee shops in downtown Bologna or Monza or Roma, they were all cheering and, they would have loved all that, wouldn't they? The last thing they would have wanted was for Charles to park the car and say, oh, I better not drive it, might get a penalty. They would have loved all that. And it'll make him even more of a hero in Italy. Whether or not he's as big a hero as Kimi Antonelli now is another matter, of course. But what an evening for the Italian fans to be watching Kimi win that race, blowing George away, blowing Lando away too, and then Charles doing what he was doing as well. And Max, I'm sure they all love Max. Anyone with racing blood in their veins would love Max. Juan Pablo, you've got racing blood in your veins, so why are you criticizing Max Verstappen? For what? Racer, is packaged Red Bull Max now second best on the grid or behind McLaren and Ferrari? Listen, it's a good question. I'd say McLaren Lando or McLaren Oscar is about equal with Red Bull Max, except that the proportions are different. Red Bull Max, it's sort of 45% Red Bull, 55% Max. McLaren Lando is sort of 55% McLaren, 45% Lando. I think that's the difference. Ferrari, maybe 50. Nah. Is the Ferrari a better car than the Red Bull right now? Good question. With these new regs, is the Ferrari as quick a car as the Red Bull? On the basis of Miami, you'd obviously have to say not. But that's one race. I suspect it'll be quicker in Canada. Don't know why, really. I'm not sure top speeds are a thing anymore, are they? But just got a gut feeling that the Ferrari will be quite good in Canada and probably better than a Red Bull. I think a Red Bull might be a bit breathless around Canada. No reason to think that way at all. Just think that. Yeah, I think I think Ferrari overall is probably slightly better than the Red Bull right now. But I think right now Max, and it all started for Max in Miami in the sprint race, didn't it? When he did that unbelievable pass on turn one and got away with it, but he couldn't do that 2 races in a row, and so he lost it in the thing. But that was an example of how good Max is. He goes away for a month, the car's uncompetitive, does a bit of Nürburgring, comes back, and then the car's obviously much better. But he doesn't just think, oh, I better just get a result now for the car. It's brilliant. We get P2, P3 here. He just thinks, right to the front, go and win this race, bang. That's why we love him. Um, oh, okay. He says Lawson's front wheels definitely locked up, but not to the extent they would. You would imagine. Okay. I mean, there was something about that didn't look right to me with the lockup. But anyway, it was very strange, wasn't it? Very strange. The gears are for sure. I mean, X-Track might make the actual gears, but they're designed, I would for sure, by Red Bull Tech Center, whatever they would call it, and it'd be the same as the A-Team gears. And to break fifth gear like that and sort of run in to Pierre like that, one of the strangest things I've seen for a long time. Abdul 12B2C. Hi, Peter. Do you think the season is over for Ferrari, or do you think Ferrari's new engine in Spa will be able to compete with Mercedes? New engine in Spa will be able to compete with Mercedes. I think, yeah, I mean, who's going to be world champion this year, Mercedes or Ferrari? You'd have to say Mercedes. So in that sense, you'd say, yeah, the season is over for Ferrari if they think they've got an absolutely realistic chance of winning the world championship. Is the season for Ferrari over in the sense that they may never win a race? No, it's not. I think they will win races. And I think, like everybody, they will improve in all areas. And they've got very good driver lineup, very, very good drivers. They've got obviously pretty good technology there. It doesn't seem to be brilliant in terms of development, but very good in terms of innovation and thinking laterally. And that, hopefully there'll be a bit more of that this year, although it's difficult within a budget cap to do that. And I think they will win races. Throw Charles the odd bit of drama affecting somebody else, a bit of rain, bit of this, bit of that, and he's going to win a Grand Prix, isn't he? And if Lewis just puts his head down, qualifies within a tenth or two of Charles, hopefully, not easy not easy after what we saw in Miami, but he could do it still. Canada, he could definitely do it. He might even out qualify Charles. Who knows? I think he'll be quick in Canada, Lewis. And all he's got to do is keep his head down and drive well in terms of not hitting anything or being hit, and he can win Grand Prix too. But that's not the way he used to win Grand Prix prior to 21, but he could still do it. Neil Williams says, hi, Peter, thank you for the live. Do you agree with some of the popular views that Leclerc is a crasher? Do you think Miami proved these voices right? Is a crasher? Well, in the sense that he doesn't go round and round and round and drive under the limit the whole time in order not to hit anything. Yeah, of course he's a crasher. In the sense that he's driving and has driven a pretty difficult race car for the last, I don't know, 5 years generally speaking, on the absolute limit. I think he's crashed that car less, given the pace that he's shown us, than probably any other driver in the world would have in that situation, apart from, say, Max. I think a lot of drivers could have driven Charles' car in the last 5 years and not crashed it, but I don't think they would have been anything like as quick. So, and it's not because he's a reactive driver and makes mistakes. It's because he's on the absolute edge all the time. And that's what you want from a racing driver. And he's just a very, very good racing driver, Charles Leclerc. And all this stuff that he's going through now, and questions like this, or people calling him a crasher, all this will be to his advantage when hopefully, eventually, he does get into a very, very good racing car. And then, a bit like Nigel in 92, then everything will be so easy for him. It'll just be like, oh, where's this been all this time? Because he's been through so much stuff that when it is his time, and it will be again at some point, it'll just be bang like that. World Championship. 3 in a row, probably. Potsy, g'day, Peter. presumably from Australia. What do you think of the idea of qualifying, of having the timing lines somewhere just before the pit entry? Would mean that cars don't have to do a full lap to get back to their box. How would that work? Don't have to do a full lap. Why is that a problem? They just do the lap and then drive into the pits. But why do we want that? We want to see the cars on track as much as possible, don't we? We want a bit of drama, traffic, closing minutes of Q1. Isn't that what Q1's all about? Is that what you're talking about? There's too much traffic and how to avoid the traffic thing. And once they do the lap, they just come straight in. I think that's probably what you're talking about. I don't know. And to me, they've got all the help they need. They've got the GPS. They've got a whole long Q1 session. If they all want to leave it and go out at the end and run a risk, then that's part of the session. That's part of the attraction of qualifying. That's what the fans want to see, isn't it? I'm not saying we want to see shunts or anything like that, but if you're in a Alpine, good example car, or Racing Bulls, pretty, both of them half reasonable cars, and you're out, and you're not in the top 16, and you're on your last lap of qualifying in Q1, then the odds are you're not going to get through because you're going to get traffic. But then again, for whatever reason, shouldn't be leaving it that late. It's about organisation, reliability, everything else. So no, I personally think keep it as it is. I think you start complicating it with things like that, you complicate it unnecessarily. And I think everything should be on the start-finish line. My brain's not big enough to be able to encompass anything else. It was bad enough for me going to Anderstorp every year with the start-finish line on the other side of the track from the pits. I couldn't work that one out either. Mouse down. I second your suggestion that Hadjar should regain some confidence outside Formula One. I watched a compilation of all these anger moments yesterday, quite the hothead. But then so was a young Roger Federer. Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, he's in pretty good hands at Red Bull. In theory, they should be able to sort of get that out of him. And I know Guillaume, his manager, will be working on that too, just to calm him down. It's just, the only point I made was that they haven't seemed to make much progress so far. I know it's only race 4, but I think it's. I mean, you don't want to take it all out of him either. You want him to be what he is. You want him to be Isaac, and it's just finding that balance. But his explanation of the shunt was not very good either, was it? It was, I don't know what happened and how I got into the wrong position. I need to work out, and blah, blah, blah. You don't need to work anything out, mate. You just made a mistake, and you shouldn't have made a mistake in a Red Bull. You're a Red Bull A driver now, and in that situation, you had absolutely nothing to lose, no pressure because you started from the pit lane. Just drive the race and drive it well, and do what you do well, short corners. Start to really work on that. Here's an opportunity to do that away from the public eye because nobody's going to be watching you on TV. And he didn't do any of that. He just was absolutely flat out and managed to get an entry wrong, hit a curb, launched him, hit the wall on the other side, and that was wrong. That was the real issue. And whether he plummets his helmet afterwards and cries or whatever, it's kind of irrelevant. And as you say, Roger Federer wasn't exactly an angel in the first part of his career, and you saw plenty of shots of Tiger Woods throwing such stuff early on, even later on actually. So yeah, I mean, it's just a sign that he's an emotional driver, a little bit like another Frenchman. Well, yes, he's a Monegasque, isn't he? Neil Williams. I remember last year in Melbourne watching Kimi. He was throwing the car around right on the edge of its grip. I thought he was going to go off at every corner, but he has come a long way. Yeah, I think that what you saw there, that Kimi was the Kimi that knew what he had to do based on George's telemetry, and he was not comfortable. He was a reactive driver then, and he was throwing it around. He did look on the edge, and he did have the odd off, and that's why he went off at the Parabolica in his first run that time. But he's not that driver now. He's definitely better now. He's definitely got the same feel on medium. If you saw him in Melbourne now, he'd look completely different. I guarantee it. Very impressive. Hello. Why did Prost beat Nigel at Ferrari in 1990? Did he? I don't think he did. I think, what do you mean by beat? Okay, that Mexican Grand Prix, Prost won it, I think, didn't he? But that race was, Nigel had some dramas early on, and that race was Nigel passing Berger on the outside of Piratella when it was a quick corner. That's what people remembered on that race. The British Grand Prix qualifying, Nigel Mansell. Let's have a look. I'm going to just go away and talk amongst yourselves for a second. I'm just going to look this up because it's worth having a look at what happened in the 1990 British Grand Prix qualifying between Nigel and Prost. And I think we'd all agree that Silverstone in those days was a pretty good litmus test of what Grand Prix racing was all about, would we not? Sorry, GP. I think we would. Well, it was, believe me. Qualifying. Right, let's have a look. Qualifying. Nigel Mansell, 174. Alan Prost, 183. Now I make that 0.9, nearly a second a lap quicker than Prost around Silverstone. So sadly, I will not ever concede that Prost beat Nigel. What happened in 90 politically at Ferrari is a different story, because Enrico Scalabroni had gone from Williams to Ferrari to take the John Barnard car into the new season with significant modifications to the geometry at the back, particularly to accommodate the different size Goodyears, and also to lower the seat in the cockpit, various other things aerodynamically he did, and did a very, very good job with them. And the car was a very, very good car. And Prost always felt that because Scalabroni was there, Nigel had some sort of advantage because he was an ex-Williams engineer. And he was quite negative about that car going into Imola, talking about a lot about cockpit buffeting and things like that. And Nigel was super quick that day. You remember it's the day he had that 360, bit like Max's 360, although Nigel's was much higher speed and it was on the grass, and he still managed to get back on track. And then he set his own personal best lap the following lap, but then retired. And this was Berger that had him off at Tamburello on the grass when Tamburello was just the kink. And after that race, with Nigel going so well, Prost no longer complained about the turbulence and sort of stayed quiet. But then he put together his own plan, which was, well, if Nigel's got Scalabroni there, I'm going to get a McLaren engineer. And then he got Steve Nichols to Ferrari pretty quickly that year. And all of a sudden, Enrico, who was supposed to be technical director, was said, well, you can be head of R&D and Steve can be chief designer. And Enrique said, well, I'm not having that. You know, we've got to do a proper car for next year. We've got to do a female mold car, as the new Williams was obviously going to be, and get on with it. And Steve, who's only really ever developed existing cars, as good as he is, nicer guy as he is, said, oh, well, let's just keep the car as it is. And anyway, Ferrari then said, oh, we'll have 4 cars at Monaco next year. We'll have a Scalabroni car, we'll have a Steve Nichols car, and both drivers are going to have a spare car, and then we'll swap them over and see which is quicker. At which point Enrique said, well, this is ridiculous. And Nigel was in the middle of all that and just thought, this is ridiculously crazy. I mean, why is Prost making this so political? We had a good team, everything was going well, now it's a mess. Nobody knows what's going on. I'm out of here. So that's what happened politically behind the scenes. But on the racetrack, he didn't beat Nigel. No way. Zishan Asfar, Peter, how did John Alesi compare with the best drivers of his time? What stopped him from making a switch to Williams in 91? Well, for me, Alesi was a little bit like Jacques Lafitte and Sebastian Vettel, in that he could really only drive quickly one way, which was a pronounced V entry into corners that would allow that to happen, or would promote that. And on most circuits there was always one corner, if not 2, where you could get away with that. And that was his calling card, really. Unbelievably early turn in, just sort of basically straight line down to a point way beyond the geometrical apex, and then just back the other way. And on, notably obviously on the Pirellis and the Tyrrell and Phoenix, he was really quick doing that. And then there were moments at Ferrari when it all came together. But then if he didn't have the back end he needed to do the rotation, he was always in trouble, much the way same way Vettel was, and the much same way that Jacques Lafitte was, compared with, say, Patrick Depailler or even Didier Pironi. So that's how he drove. Why did he not go to Williams in '91? I don't know. I mean, all I know is that when we started talking, I say we, I was obviously close to Nigel at that time, still am. When we talked about Nigel going back to Williams, it was always with Ricardo in the other car. There was never a moment when Nigel was talking to Frank, or we were talking to Frank Sheridan, where we didn't say, but Frank, the team, the gold team is going to be Nigel Ricardo. We've got to have that. And I don't ever remember Frank saying throughout any point in '90, oh, well, I really want a lazy. But I think you're right, that there was some contract with him, wasn't there? There was something with maybe he just had a contract with him, and then because I just don't remember that bit. I think Nigel was just so emphatic that he wanted Ricardo that Frank then just either paid Jean off or that was it. Something like that. Didn't it involve a car as well, a Ferrari, I think? Don't know, I need to look that one up. Thank you very much. I've kind of forgotten that. I'll tell you who would know about that. It would be Johnny Williams. I'll ask him. Max Flashut. Hi, Peter in chat. Hi, Max. Good to see you. The bum gyro. Yeah, well, whatever. Another one from Max. Last year, Lawson had the steering ratio change in Austria, and that is when his season turned around. The change was to be closer, the RB21 ratio. I found that interesting at the time. Yeah, under the heading of fingertip driving. Yeah, interesting. And we've had Lewis talk about the steering as well, and Kimi. And Mark Slater said how Kimi was always, very, very, very sensitive to the steering. Stagger, he never wanted stagger, which means that when the car's going straight, the steering wheels turn slightly in one way or the other. Mario, when Mario was in Formula One and things were really humming along at Lotus, he would often have stagger built into the car, and the car would not be dead center coming out of the pit lane. The steering wheel would not be dead center. Of course, Dan Gurney, it never was. He always wanted the steering, particularly when it was a 4-spoke wheel, big one on the Ferraris. He always used to have it slightly like that, so that he could be ready with the opposite lock. He told me, he said, "Oh yeah, I always had it in a position. It was never straight. I always wanted to be ready for the old slide." So yeah, I don't think that's a massively unusual thing. Steering ratio, maybe. Ask Mark again if it's unusual to have that, but not. It obviously wasn't when he was running Kimi, because he talked to us about how sensitive Kimi was to the steering ratio. Yeah, it's ratio, not ration. Yeah, okay. Biochem girl. I think the innovations from Active Aero could be cool, but I want the drivers to have control of it 100%. I think we would see further development of the top drivers' skills. Yeah, but are they not in control of it 100%? I thought they were. They're not. They're not. It's a bit spooky. But we do want to see further development of the top driver's skills. I agree with that. And you know my philosophy, well, hopefully you do, which is basically get rid of all aero if you possibly can in every dimension, because then you'll have a car that's much more rewarding of drivers' skills or penalizing of drivers' skills. But I don't think it'll ever happen, because for the simple reason that bodywork and wings are very good for sponsors, logos. So there you go. Gavin Finlayson. Gavin, chapeau to you. Wonderful channel, Peter. I've just become a member, which at $4.99 is surely the bargain of the century. It's very sweet of you to say so. Warms my heart. Thank you very much. You wouldn't know the agonizing I had thinking about how to do this, the membership thing. And I don't know how many people have heard or talked about or even were involved in the live stream we did, the live chat we did during the race in Miami. It is for members, and we're going to do that most races this year. I'm toying with the idea of doing it in Canada, even though it's going to be midnight or something in Europe. But yeah, I think we'll do it because it's a lot of fun. And, I will say this to anybody that has just become a member, like you, Gavin, or indeed anybody that's toying with the idea, hopefully you'll not be disappointed, because we will be doing these live chats during the race. And it is something pretty special, actually. It's special from my point of view, interfacing with you guys. And it's a lot of fun. So, yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's true the V8s are coming back. Well, I think the FIA president is sort of, he presumably knows what he's doing. I mean, it's a fairly glib statement, isn't it? But I can tell you now, he's not in a position now to say what the regs are going to be in 30 or 32, any future regs. He's the president of the FIA, but others certainly play a major role in defining the regulations. And that hasn't even started yet, really. So let's talk about it. And let's talk now, obviously. But there's nothing agreed. All we know is that he thinks it should go that way. And I agree with him. So that's good. Max says Canada is mostly maple. Well, yeah, I really do miss the old pancakes with maple syrup, I must say. There's one Tim Hortons in Spain, as far as I know, certainly our part of Spain. It's at Alicante Airport. It's pretty good. I'm not sure it even has pancakes with maple, actually, though, sadly. But there's none where we live. So don't even talk to me about pancakes and maple. It annoys me. Max again, V8 seem to be on the list for 31, nothing signed yet. No, right. And there's a long way to go, because if BYD, is that what they're called? And Audi, and I don't know, let's throw in a few others, Geely, all have meetings with Liberty and say, if you make Formula One 75% electric, we will come in, and furthermore, we will create new teams and place a bond of $2 billion each team in the kitty of Liberty and the FIA. Then we will come into Formula One. They're not going to say no to that. I'm making up the numbers, of course, but you see where I'm coming from. There's a lot of money to be rejected before Formula One goes down the V8 path again. You know my feelings. I don't think money is that important in the overall scheme of things. I think it's all about what's right for the sport. And as a purist, all I want is the show, and I want to see good racing in affordable race cars, by which I mean market value. And I want them to be noisy, and I want them to be spectacular, and I want the racing to be good. That's what I want as a purist. But most people, I think, are in discussion or in confusion as to what a purist really is these days, because the purist view in reality is we've got to have electric Formula One, as I said at the start of the year. So it's crazy. Perez Karesteshi. Hi, Peter. Why do other drivers keep criticizing Max? Recently, Sainz and George. Isn't what a great driver has to do to overtake? He's a really hard racer, and that is what Formula One is all about. Well, yeah. And as I say, you know, those guys are criticizing him because they're not doing what he's doing. And he's out there being not only super quick and getting the best from a quite difficult car still, but he's doing amazing things in traffic and with car control. And then that's annoying Montoya because he wants to be king of car control. And it's annoying Sainz and George because they want to be king of track craft and overtakes. And his George and his Max making them all look like, you know, beginners. And of course, it's what racing's all about. And of course, Max Verstappen is the best driver in the world. And I don't know why. It's typical of Formula One, isn't it? You know, you'd never get a golfer saying, even now, I mean, take Tiger Woods out of it, but you'd never get a golfer. And I talk about golf because I know a little bit about it, but you'd never get Ricky Fowler saying, "Oh well, Scotty Scheffler's just lucky." I mean, he's not that good a golfer. I mean, it's just luck that he's holding all those putts and getting that ball so out of the bunker so well. And you know, we shouldn't really get too carried away with him. And in fact, he's not very good. You'd never get any golfer saying that about the number one golfer in the world. So why in motor racing is it okay for one Pablo Montoya, and looks like Carlos Sainz now, and George Russell, to not, who is clearly the number one driver in the world, Max Verstappen? Why is that okay? It's not. It's just pathetic. It's jealousy, isn't it, ultimately? DRD nobody. That's a good one. If you inherently believe that a long corner driver won't beat a short corner driver, then realistically, what advantages can long corner drivers have across the season? Is Russell screwed then? Oh well, he is. If Kimi continues to make no mistakes, get the best from the car, he will never be beaten by George over a season. For sure. But that's a big ask of Kimi Antonelli, and he will make mistakes, and there will be weekends when he doesn't get the setup right, or he has a problem, he makes a mistake on a Friday, and it carries through. All of that will come into play, and a long corner driver, as Carlos Sainz showed in recent times at Ferrari, if you back away a little bit from all those mistakes that you inevitably make when you're trying to brake as late as possible in a straight line and get on the power as soon as possible, and then you're left in a position where you can do nothing just but react to the car if the back end comes out because you're not actually anticipating it, you're just on the absolute edge all the time. That sort of driver makes mistakes, and the only way he can get into a rhythm or a groove that'll win him a championship is to back away from all those limits slightly. Whereas a great short corner driver, because he's more supple, because he's manipulating the car, not necessarily creating short corners every part of the lap, but because he has all the suppleness that you require in order to do that, doesn't need to back away. He's warning the car before he does what he does, and therefore he's ready for the unstable rear, for the flick oversteer, for the crosswind. And that's where a great short corner driver, or a driver with the capability of being a great short, will always score. That's what it is. It's just that ability to manipulate the car rather than react to what the car has suddenly done. And over a season, that adds up big time. And as I say, if Kimi as a Miami weekend, forget about whether he wins in Miami or not, but if he drives as well as he did in Miami in terms of recovering from a difficult Friday, not getting flustered after a difficult qualifying for the sprint race, drives well in the sprint race, keeps his head, makes no mistakes, incredibly consistent under pressure from Lando Norris, doesn't overuse the tyres. If he does all of that every race, he's in good shape, believe me. Connor Clark says he enjoyed the live stream on Sunday, the live race chat. Well, that's good to know. Thank you very much. Speaking of Connor, and reminding myself of Derek Daly, his son Connor, a reminder that, if you didn't know already, Derek's autobiography called Serial Survivor is being published tomorrow. And on that day, we will be posting publicly quite a long interview I did with Derek. Obviously on the back end of the book being published, but about his career, his life. Fascinating guy. He's been a friend of mine for a long time, and he speaks very directly and very concisely too, and in a very colourful Irish way about his life and times. So watch out for the publication of that book. It's published by Evro, and it's a great book. It's difficult to put it down. And also that interview that'll be going public tomorrow as well on this channel with Derek. I hope you enjoy those. Yeah, I mean, quick driver Derek Daly. He took over the Williams when Carlos suddenly retired after the Brazilian Grand Prix 82. Didn't have a great run at Williams, and he's quite critical actually about Williams at that time. Interesting take on that period when he says that, it was a very uncomfortable team to be with at that moment. Very Keke Rosberg centric, obviously. And then he had that huge shunt in America from which he recovered. But it's also fun talking to Derek. It was fun talking to Derek about his early days, and Eddie Jordan right back in the Formula Ford days. Great picture of Eddie in the book, and it'll be in the interview as well. You'll see it, and lots of stuff like that. Terminator 6068. Hi Peter, thank you for all the great content. Big fan. Thank you very much, mate. I know you're following up rising stars in the sport. What do you think about Nikola Solov from F2? Thank you and have a great day. Yeah, got a lot of time for him. Drives for my mates down the road, Campos, and yeah, he's good, isn't he? He's very good. Although I was very pleased to see, as I mentioned to Cameron, Gabriele Mini win the F2 race in Miami, because I've always been a Mini fan. And I always forget to mention him when people say, who do you like? And the young guys. I know he's been around quite a long time now, but I like him. I think he's good. And I'm very pleased he won. So yeah, and Colton Herta was quickest in on-time practice in Miami too. That was good. I've got a lot of time for Colton. And I'm presuming he's going to be in the Cadillac next year, presumably in Valtteri's seat, I guess. I don't know, but that's worth watching him. But F2, yeah, all starting to shape up with F2. We'll start watching that again with great interest. Speaking of Juan Pablo, Sebastian, very nice guy, Sebastian Montoya, his son. So I hope he has it. I think he's with Prema, I think. Max says, please remember to hit the like button if you like the stream. Well, that's very nice of you, Max. I would never say that because I'm much too, I don't know, whatever. Flatlander, I thought the drivers who missed Max were the guys deserving the praise. They really showed real skills in avoidance of a driver being too aggressive. Yeah. I think Pierre Gasly was one of those that did a very good job. And I did say that at the start, we shouldn't forget about those guys that missed him. Mind you, you see smoke and a car spinning in front of you. You are going to sort of avoid him, aren't you, best you can. So it's the people behind the people that really did a good job because they anticipated who was going to brake, which way they were going to go, and then where they were going to go. And some people obviously came out of it well and some didn't. I got a member at the top here. Welcome as a member. Thank you very much. Saudal Guazaya. Thank you very much for that. Very nice. Thank you. Says, it's Kaz, loved your point about being shocked Russell would admit there are tracks he struggles at. Well, yeah. It's not the thing, it was just an unwritten rule of I mean, it's a bit like, it's not like a golfer saying, I much prefer Augusta to St Andrews, because golfers are human beings and every human being is different. And some golfers can play a fade naturally, some can play a draw naturally, some are left-handed, some are right-handed. They are the race car, if you like. So it stands to reason that they would say, oh, well, I don't like this course or that. But when you're a racing driver in a racing car and everybody's doing every race and there are two identical cars in every team, how can one driver say, oh, well, I don't really like Miami, I'm not very good there? When the engineers and all the people in the wind tunnel and all the people in the vehicle dynamics department and the suspension design department work like crazy to find 0.2 of a second advantage from the car, and then the driver says, oh, well, I'm not very good at that circuit, don't really like it. How does that work? I don't get it. I really don't get that. And I'm astonished because, I've worked closely with, Carlos Reutemann, Nigel Mansell, Stefan Johansson, Raul Boesel, EJ Viso, and a couple of others. And none of them, Ross Cheever, another, and none of them would even begin to say, oh, I don't like that place, I'm not very good there. Because if you say that, it goes into your brain that there's something that you can't do very well there. And you're a racing driver. You're driving for the best team in Formula One, and you're potentially going to be world champion this year. I just don't know how you can do that. It's like, here's a bottle of mineral water. Nah, I think I'll get some greasy old tap water and put that in. Oh, that doesn't taste very nice. Why would you do that? Why would you put in a thought like that into your psyche? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you put a poisonous thought like that into your psyche? Why don't you always say, I mean, I suppose in credit to George, he's probably trying to be nice to the team and not blame them and trying to take it on himself. But he's doing it in such a way that it doesn't really make sense, because what he should be saying is, Kimi is actually doing something with the car and the steering and the brake throttle and the brakes that I'm not, and I need to be able to do that as well as Kimi. And he just can't bring himself, like all racing drivers in Formula One, he can't bring himself to say that a teammate's doing something better than he is. That's what it is, I think. And so it's all it's very confusing. As a new fan, Frank, as a new fan trying to understand Formula One, how are Max's overtakes allowed when they seem to be against the rules? Like in Miami when he pushed a car off track, even though his car was too far behind. Well, if you're new to Formula One, don't worry about it. We have a few stupid rules, and they're not real. They're not really very good, and they don't make sense. And just enjoy the racing, I think is the advice I would give you. We have far too many rules, and we're getting to the point now, I think, where on that particular occasion, just so you know, because both drivers agreed that it was a racing incident, no action was taken, and that is because, for sure, Who was it? Was it George? Was it? No, I think it was with George. I think. Um, Max would have said, George could have said, "Oh, I was on a perfect line, everything was perfect, and Max just pushed me off the track." Then Max would have said, "Yeah, but hang on a sec, you had massive understeer mid corner, and I was trying to get the car straight and to get down inside you, and then you came back on the left again when you got through the understeer." Oh well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay, well, let's call it a racing incident. It's that sort of thing, and when both drivers call it quits, that's a good thing, I think, because at least they're showing a bit of maturity there and knowing that it is a racing incident. Of course it is. Nobody deserved a penalty for that. And the show doesn't deserve that either. After everything it's gone through, we want Max Verstappens of this world in there doing what they do. And they're race drivers. And if Max gets away with it, so can the others. They need to get on with it and stop complaining. Vegas oneification. G'day, Peter. With your experience with US Formula One and setting up a new team, what are your thoughts on the challenges and achievements of Cadillac? Well, I don't have much experience because USF1 didn't last very long, but I don't have any Formula One experience in that sense because every time I've tried to do a team, there have been 3 occasions, I've never got to the point where we could actually set the thing up and go racing. And so it's been a very frustrating period of my life from which I obviously learned, but not necessarily enjoyable. And in our case, by the time we were signed into the Concord Agreement, we had 6 months to set up a factory, design and build a car, test it, get it crash tested, and go racing, which of course is an impossibility. So that was why it didn't happen. What I would say was that Cadillac have had a little bit less of a smooth run than Haas, who had enough time in the world to get everything going. They got Dallara to build the car. Everything was done in a nice time frame, so good luck to them. They pulled it off. But Cadillac had all those growing pains of whether the team was going to exist or not, which wouldn't have been very comfortable for them. And then the whole Jim Jordan thing on the Capitol Hill and all that stuff, and then Cadillac taking over the whole deal, and the Andretti's. It's all been a bit, messy. And so personally, it's no surprise they're at the back. Although it's, you would imagine that with the rule book designing 80% of the car for you and the 20% being a little bit of innovative engineering and a bit of flair and the Ferrari powertrain and the money, which is obviously there, you'd imagine they'd be going a little bit better than they are. I would have thought so. So I'm a bit disappointed they're not going better, really. That's why I said from day one, to me, it was a waste of time employing 2 drivers who are very experienced. If they're not super quick, it's not going to really do much for the team because we've seen super experienced drivers like Massa and Barrichello go to Williams and they're super experienced, did nothing. And so it is at Cadillac. I think they would have been much better off running 2 very, very quick young guys in there, pushing the car on the limit all the time, having a few crashes and stuff, all of which they can afford because they're rich, Cadillac, and go and use this year when they're growing as a team and getting everything in place to have 2 young guys just to sort of cut their teeth so they can hit the ground running in 2027. That's what I would have done. I just don't believe in this business of you need all this, this background and how to run the team and run the car. It's new regulations anyway. Everybody's learning. So what was the point? And we don't really know how quick or slow that car is because I would not say that Perez or Bottas are, that quick. They're okay. They're very good. The midfield Grand Prix drivers these days, they can hold their own, score points, maybe get a podium in a really good car, but I don't think they are, right up there. And I think that's always a problem for a team, whether it's a new team or an old team. Always have the youngest, quickest guys you can get at any given moment would be my main criticism of Cadillac. Biochem, I think Carlos was more frustrated with his situation where Williams is right now. Max raced like he always does. The midfield should take it as a compliment. Yeah, and Carlos is right to be frustrated. It's his own doing, going to Williams, that is. Yes, if he was in an Audi, he'd be similarly midfield, but at least he would have a bit more structure to his life and his career and where he's going. And, it's a new team, new branding, and he's got this long-term deal with Audi if he'd gone there. Whereas with Williams, you know, what's the future at Williams? I just don't get it. I don't get where he thinks his career is going now, other than just thrashing around, trying to go a little bit quicker than Alex Albon. What does that prove? You know, and that's why I always said it was a wrong thing to go to Williams. And is Max is Max. Max Flashheart says Alpine updates also got a better rear end and it suits Franco more than Gasly. Really? Well, it would only suit Franco more than Gasly if having a better rear end has destroyed the front, which could well be what's happened. And if that's the case, Pierre won't be very happy about it. Pierre's the sort of guy that, like all good, very, very good drivers, he wants a front. He can live with all the other stuff. He can live with a flick oversteer. Whereas there's no way Franco can live with flick oversteer. We know that. So what you've said makes a lot of sense. And to me, that's a mistake. It's not a mistake if you see all your money in the future is coming from Argentina and you want Franco to do as well as he's doing. But it is a mistake if you want to get the best from Pierre Gasly, who's the quicker driver, because you know what you don't want to do is take away his front end. Anteoni. The whole Montoya hating on Verstappen thing stems from the fact that Verstappen really reminds him of Schumacher. Why? And we know the beating Michael gave him. Ha ha ha. He has a massive inferiority complex. He has some sort of complex. Why would Montoya think that Verstappen reminds him of Schumacher? Seems an odd thing. I can see the obvious points, you know, too aggressive, dirty driver, or whatever he wants to think. But yeah, it's a very odd thing, isn't it? Just because he reminds me of this, so I hate that guy. He reminds me of that. Yeah, that guy reminds me of that song I used to hate, and that song reminds me of this girlfriend that I used to have, and that's why I hate that driver. You know? What is that all about? Max says, share the love. Max Flash out, that is, will do. John Papp says, Colapinto is a pretty talented driver. Bet he likes sharp front end, just like it was the case in his first few races for Williams. The Alpine might be fast, but as a car, it looks really reluctant. Okay. I'm not convinced, being a long corner driver, but that he undoubtedly is, and he is pretty talented in that respect. That he does want a razor sharp front end. I think he does want a very good back end. That's what you want if you're a long corner driver. You're driving on the loaded rear. That's where you're feeling the car. That's another point talking about where drivers feel. It depends what you feel when you initially create the lateral load. What do you want to feel in the car? Do you want to feel the front? Do you want to feel the rear? What do you want to feel? In Colapinto's case, absolutely for sure, he wants to feel the rear. And he wants to balance the car because he's got great car control. He wants to balance it on the rear, and then he wants to get on the power as soon as he can and get the corner done with that way. Whereas Gasly, in my opinion, as soon as he wants to extend the straight a little bit, and then all he wants to feel is the loaded front. He wants to feel where he is with the front. Back end's going on, no problem. I can just massage that with the throttle, and all he's doing is driving in the front of the car. So he's the guy that wants the front. But yeah, of course, Colapinto is talented. I mean, when I criticize a driver, I'm doing it. We're talking about the top, 0.5% of racing drivers in the world. They're all very good. Lance Stroll's pretty good, but some of them are different and some of them are better than others. That's all, that's all we're talking about. And sorry, Pierre Gasly is a better driver than Franco Colapinto. Hadjar got the first taste of Mac's career killer. Has the downfall of Hadjar begun? Yuki forgot to warn Hadjar, the tsunami's coming, says Drew. Well, give him a break. He did qualify top 10. I know he was over the thing. I don't think it made any difference. And then he had to start from the pit lane with the engine and all the rest of it. But he did. I don't think Yuki would have qualified top 10 in that race, for that race. I don't think he would have. I don't think Liam would have. So I don't think you can say that. I think this was an example of Hadjar. No, I think it's an example of Max is starting, as I said, to just find ways he can use the power deployment around his own ability to do what he does into corners, and he's doing that very well. And that's not the sort of thing he would be talking about in debriefs. They may say, "Oh, what are you doing here or there?" But he wouldn't necessarily be talking about that. And anyway, he is what he is. He's very quick, and all of a sudden he's feeling comfortable in the layout of the car. And Hadjar was All he was, I mean, he could have had a very good race, actually. He just made a mistake. As I said, a ridiculous time and place to make a mistake when there's no pressure on him. Whatever he did from the pit lane was always going to be good, whether he finished 10th or 11th or 8th. Everyone was always going to say, oh, great drive. And no one was watching him anyway. So what the hell was he doing making a mistake there? That was what we saw. We didn't see the Red Bull, curse of Red Bull #2 driver. What we saw there is, wow, Isaac Hadjar makes mistakes. As if we didn't know that. Max Flashart says, Montoya just realized how to go viral on social media. And what does that prove? What is that? Why would Montoya be interested? He's never been interested in that sort of stuff. Why would he suddenly want to be interested in going viral on social media? It doesn't make him any money. It doesn't do anything for his businesses, I wouldn't have thought. And then Itzkaz says, go back to NASCAR one, Pablo. Yeah, well, there you go. Max says, Lawson broke fifth gear ring when he hit the brakes, then went into neutral and anti-stall, so no rear braking, then locked the front. Yeah, but he didn't lock the front immediately. That's my point. He didn't. What I imagine would have happened is that the gear would have broken, and he already would have been braking with the fronts, 99% of the braking on the fronts anyway. So when that happened, surely the fronts would have just lit up with smoke, and he just would have gone straight on. That's what I don't understand. Because if he broke fifth, he's already going down from eighth, right? So he's braking. That's the thing I don't understand. I think he either reacted late to that, or he was so shocked at what had happened, he came out of the brakes maybe. I don't know. Yeah, of course, he eventually locked, but it wasn't what you would expect when you suddenly lose all your rear braking and engine braking. You just imagine that if that happened, it's like the whole back of the car is disconnected and all the braking's on the front. Boom, lock up. You see my point? Yeah. Quebec Douglas says, Peter, Raikkonen or Alonso? For what? Driving a Renault around Monza with front wing hanging off and punctured right rear and winning the race, or doing an unbelievable lap of Silverstone in a McLaren Mercedes? I think, I don't know. I mean, they're different sorts of people, aren't they? Alonso's a sort of swashbuckling Spanish racing driver. Kimi is a sort of, as we know, is a Finnish super quick driver that wasn't really interested in anything other than just driving racing cars. And I'm not sure he was even that interested in racing, a bit like Carlos Reutemann. You're just, a bit boring, all this traffic. I think you just like driving cars on the absolute limit and doing a great job. And which I mean, good team to have together. Let's put it that way. Okay, I'm going to have Alonso and Raikkonen. Thank you. In my team, very good at their peak. Red Bull powertrains had gearbox and clutch issues, and it's concerning how many have been used. Did they? Okay. Well, is it? It's a completely new drivetrain, powertrain. So, given how well they're going, I don't think it's that concerning. I never imagined they would be just rock solid Mercedes like, or Ferrari like, even for that matter, at this stage of the year. So, yeah, I think they're doing okay actually. Biochem Girl says, probably anti-stall procedure so the gearbox didn't eat itself. He likely was going to rely entirely on engine brake there to harvest and control the speed. So it was just unexpected when he lost it. Yeah, I think that's the point. I think he was very shocked. I don't want to use the word shocked because Grand Prix drivers don't like to be shocked. They're not people who are shocked by anything. They're ready for anything. But I think he was shocked at what happened. It was such an unusual thing that there was a moment when he wasn't absolutely rock hard solid on the front brakes, just getting the thing off to the right. I think there was a moment when it was sort of freewheeling, as you say, effectively anti-stall, which is what I said, nothing happening at the rear, and then he braked. All of which, does that come under the heading of the new regulations, again, causing some drama that would never have happened in the old days? Let's think about that, because that's for sure what happened with Colapinto and Berman at Suzuka. And that was one of the catalysts for the changes we've had. Is this another example? Can we have sort of these driverless cars when calamitous gearbox failures occur? I think it's a drama. I'm not sure that it is actually a total function of these regs, though. I think if that happened in the old days, it would still be a drama. I need to talk about Mark about that, but I think that's the case. Benjamin. People are talking more about Montoya because he got hired for F1 TV and Sky. Oh, okay. Well, always muting the sound as I do and listening only to the team radios. I wouldn't know. Max Flashart, he would have made the corner normally. That is why it looks so weird. Yeah. Biochem Girl says, I think you've got it on the head here. He likely just didn't think fast enough to use the regular brakes instead. But he was on the regular brakes. You know, that's the point. You can't not be on the regular brakes. And as I say, in these cars, virtually all the braking is on the front anyway. That's why I keep going on about why I'm so shocked that we didn't see clouds of white smoke coming out of the front brakes instantly that this happened. Because that's the only braking they have anyway, is on the front, as far as I can see. Because the rear is all to do with power generation. Wait was awesome, but crazy. Cameron CC here. Well, the wait was awesome, but Cameron's here. Well, everything is okay if Cameron's here. Good old Cameron. Majero stock. Hi, Peter. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on Red Bull's management. When you look at the staff departures and then hear what Mekis has to say, it seems to me two different directions. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I thought he was quite erudite and quite nice. I quite liked his comments after the race, actually. I mean, I've got no illusions. I think Laurent Mekis is a politician, and I think he's a manager of people, and he's a good manager of companies. The jury's out as to whether he's a racer, and by which I mean, if all the money fell out of Formula One tomorrow, and there was no more Formula One, and everybody just had to put together a race team and go racing somewhere, whether Laurent Mekis would be at the front of the queue to be doing that, or whether he'd be going off and working for a merchant bank, I don't know. So that's my reservation about him, if you like, because I come from the generation, or indeed the part of society which is real racers at Snetterton in the rain, changing gear ratios. But I do think he's done a good job, and they've got Ben Waterhouse and they're promoting inside, and for him to be saying what he's saying and the car to be going pretty well, give him some credit. I'm going to give him some credit anyway. It seems like he's a pretty good guy, and does have a feel for listening to people and getting good people to do the right thing at the right time, which is what race team management is all about. It is all about, because most people are in a race team at that level are pretty good at something. It could well be they're miscast because somebody else is doing the job that they really want to do. And if you are, say, a number 2 mechanic in the race team, and you are then offered the position of number 1 mechanic in the race, in the factory doing the prototype build, and you think, well, is that a step up or not? And you think, well, if I've run that, maybe then I could come back as chief mechanic or whatever. You're always thinking about those things. And good management is making sure that the right people have got the right incentives and are doing the right thing. Not easy to do. It takes a lot of time and a lot of listening. Michael Schumacher liked listening to all the mechanics and all their backgrounds and their families and the wives, names of the wives and the dog, and when their birthdays are. All that stuff is very important, and I get the impression Laurent Mekis is very good at that. And that's probably to his credit. Well, it is to his credit for sure. So Max is saying, yeah, the actual brakes on the rear are never used. He's absolutely right. Anthony says, I really feel for the likes of McLaren and Ferrari when Mercedes upgrade package arrives in Canada. Antonelli and Russell will just go into the distance for the remainder of the season. Well, yeah, as Max just says, what I was going to say, upgrades don't always work. And when you've got a very good car, you've got to be a bit careful about upgrades just for the sake of it. It's a bit like undercuts. It's a thing now. We measure the undercut. Who got the undercut? Who won the undercut? The race of the undercut. You can also, who's got the upgrades? Who's had the most upgrades? Who's got the first upgrade? Next upgrade? Upgrades. It's a thing, isn't it? It's a measurable thing now, and it's part of social media. Upgrades. But teams are always changing their cars. Always. And a racing car is never the same from one race to another. Never. even though some of the things are shown on the FIA as a change they've made to the car for that race, there are going to be other things that they're not going to talk about. And, you know, Mercedes may well have something significantly different, but it won't necessarily be an upgrade. We've seen top teams bring new floors before, and the car's been no better. Anyway, knowing Mercedes, they're pretty good, pretty methodical. And anyway, Canada is going to be a very good circuit for them, win, lose, or draw. So is it a good place, therefore, for them to bring an upgrade? Is the next question. Because for sure, they're going to be quick in Canada. Even with no upgrades, they're still going to be quick there. Dream Pony Dream. Hi, Peter. My question, I've watched many Aussie Formula One careers from Webber, Danny Rick, now Oscar. My question is, how hard is it for Aussie drivers to break through? And what obstacles do they, well, I can't see the rest of it, but anyway, do they face? Aussie drivers. Well, Daniel Ricciardo showed that you can do it the Formula One way. He went pretty well in Australia. Didn't have a particularly long racing career in Australia, and then basically went into a Red Bull shootout and won it, and got into the Red Bull stream, and it took him all the way to Toro Rosso to Formula One. So in that sense, being an Aussie didn't hurt him at all. Webber had a more significant Australian racing career, not massively though, so only Formula Ford level, but came over immediately, won the festival, and did very well in Formula 3, thanks mainly to Alan Docking, who helped him with the budget, and then went from there, you know, schmoozed Norbert Haug at Mercedes, got a Merc drive. Yeah, resilient with horrendous shunts and things like that, showed his character, got into the Benetton young driver program with Flavio and Alonso, and thereafter did very well. So again, being an Australian didn't really hurt him. In fact, it probably helped him because he had the image of being, you know, an Iron Man, and did a lot of that stuff that challenged Tasmania and all that. So that was good. So I don't think it matters anymore if you're Australian, really, and you've got the talent and you want to make it. I think you can do it. I think it was probably more difficult in the old days. And I've just been rereading one of my favorite books, which is called From Mount Druitt to Monza. And it's a book by Barry Collison, who probably none of you have ever heard of, but he was a very quick single-seater driver in the early 60s in Australia, and decided to come over to Europe and do Formula 3, and did Formula 3 when it was at its peak. 1 litre Formula 3, you basically put a Formula 3 car, in his case an Lexus, I think, on the back of a VW Combi, and you drove all around Europe. And you got starting money to go to all these obscure countries, some of them behind the Iron Curtain in those days, racing on unbelievably dangerous circuits, but there were lots of you, and it was like a big traveling show, fair, and circus. And he was talented. You know, he would be up there with, in the early days, guys like Ronnie Peterson, and it was that sort of pace, but no money, and very difficult to do anything, and went back to Australia, and that was it. A lot of stories like that. I mean, Dave Walker was another one. A very, very good driver, Dave Walker, much better than his 1 year at Lotus in '72 ever showed. But he was subjugated by Peter War, and various other things didn't go right for him that year. But very quick driver, should have done more. Tim Schenken, another that is very talented, a very talented racing driver, and should have had a better career. But nothing to do with his Australian nationality, I think. It was just the way it went with Tim, you know. And it's a good question. You know, I grew up in Australia, and when I was there, you know, working for the Australian Automobile Racing Club, in the school holidays, Jeff Sykes initiated a driver to Europe scheme, which was very good. And 2 of the beneficiaries of that were Jim Sullivan, who did well for a while in Formula 3 in England, and Brian Muir, who was really quick and went on to be pretty successful. You know, GT40s, big touring cars, you know, right up there with all the top drivers of the day. Frank Gardner, another great Australian as well. So obstacles, I don't think there are that many, to be honest. If you these days, I think if you make it, and I think as a general rule, I don't think young drivers have ever had it with so many options of what they can do. And I often say this to young drivers when they, when occasionally we talk about what should they do and how can they advance their careers. Never forget that you actually have a TV channel now that you can create, and it's called YouTube. And and you're living the dream already. Even if you're in Formula 3, you're living the dream. And the more you can develop a YouTube channel around your own career and your own life, the better it'll be the day you need to raise real sponsorship in order to get to the next level. Because apart from selling the racing, which is a very difficult sell these days because so little of it is on TV, Formula One takes all the exposure, you can sell your YouTube channel. That's a much more logical thing to do. But very few drivers do it because they tend to go down the path of wanting to look like a Red Bull or a McLaren driver in the hope that they will become a Red Bull or McLaren driver, and that means going to the gym, the physio, this and that. And so they never really spend the time you have to take in order to create a really good YouTube channel. But to me, that's more important than anything else right now, is having your own media platforms around which you can generate sponsorship rather than the actual race category in which you're competing. Biochem says, I think Charles will win races this year. We're already seeing the gap develop between Charles and Lewis now that the drivers are settling into the new cars. Yeah, poor old Lewis. Let's wait and see. Let's see Lewis in Canada. I think Lewis will have a good Canadian Grand Prix. Don't forget, Canada was the first race in which he really asserted himself over Fernando Alonso and got the pole before winning his first Grand Prix. That was all just how good he was under high-speed braking compared with Fernando at that point on carbon industry brakes, which Fernando didn't like. And then, of course, Jenson Button, you could argue, got the better of Lewis there, but Lewis was quick that day, just, made mistakes. Farr says, Montoya, he should keep his mouth shut. No, question mark. Should he keep his mouth shut? Okay, we have to answer that question. Brandon Dukes, 2031 regs for engines, but what about the Arrow? Well, we don't have the regs for engines yet. We've got talk about it, and we got the FIA president saying where he thinks it should go. Yeah, but what about the Arrow? Ban the Arrow. Get rid of the Arrow. Let's go back to 1967 looking cars. Brilliant. Max says, more fires in the pit lane? Hope not. I mean, I was a bit concerned reading all the business about lightning and what the team should do if there was a lightning drama in Miami. Of course, Florida has very strict lightning rules for obvious reasons, which is a good thing. But it does open the door of, they need to be very careful with these cars, don't they? Anything approaching lightning with these cars. And fires in the pit lane, I don't know, are they? Well, I don't think so. Maybe, I don't know. Max says, Hadjar was playing with that concrete barrier all weekend with the new upgrades. Then he broke them. Poor guy. So now Hadjar will be behind Max's car with upgrades. Oh, well, maybe. Oh, back to Lawson again. This is from Life of Bry. When Lawson said it went into neutral and from fifth, did he mean that because it didn't gear down and there wasn't much help from the engine to slow it down in time? Yeah, it broke. Fifth gear broke. I suspect the dog rings broke. I mean, I'd be very surprised if the actual gear broke, but it could happen, I suppose. It broke in fifth. He was under heavy braking at the time. When it broke, instantly he would have felt as if he had no braking at the rear at all. But the conundrum is why instantly the fronts didn't lock up massively and slow the car more and enable him to sort of keep going in a straight line off to the right. That is what I'm confused about. Yes, he eventually locked the fronts, but it would have been a shocking moment for him, that's for sure. Peter, what's the most impressive road driving you've seen by an F1 driver or racing driver? That's a good question. Well, I mean, quite recently, I still love the moment when I was with Terry Newell in the Rally 1 Hyundai in Finland, and it's before the rally start, before we did the stage, and he's going up and down. Went up this road, and he's warming up the brakes, doing this, braking very hard and turning and warming up the brakes and tires, and then he realizes that he's gone far enough and needs to get back, and I hope I'm not dropping him in here, but just in a very small gap between the oncoming traffic, he just went with the handbrake and he's straight back. Perfect. To the point where the guy in front of whom he filtered probably didn't even see it happen. It happened so quickly. It was just absolutely perfect, pin sharp. I remember that more than I remember actually the stage, which was just a blur of flying in the air and beautiful slides. But in terms of Formula One drivers, uh, it's probably still driving with Carlos Reutemann in the wet at Brands in my Fiat 131 Abarth, and how, particularly Paddock Bend. I mean, he was it was, I wouldn't say he was so sideways. He was absolutely perfect. Of course he was sideways. And as you go over the rise there, it was the back end would do that. And then everything was just fingertips, and it was throttle tips as well. Toes, throttle. It was just perfectly balanced, and he perfectly hit just the edge of the curb at the bottom of the hill. Nigel, I remember doing that. I remember doing a day with Nigel at Donington, and we were out in a BMW 5 Series with Nigel, and it was a very similar thing, particularly down the hill, which is a bit of Donington I was never really very good at, because it's quick. You know, you're down the hill through the left hand and the right, actually where he shunted in the BTCC race. And that bit, he was through the left. The car was just, well over the limit of adhesion, and he was just absolutely perfect. And the other one, I got to say, similar thing. It was a bigger BMW for some reason, 7 Series, I suppose, with Martin Brundle at Silverstone in the wet Grand Prix circuit. Very good. Ronnie Peterson, Ford Granada at Silverstone in the wet. But Ronnie was just like full lock oversteer everywhere. It was full lock one way, full lock the other. And that was brilliant to watch. Like the thing I did with Rosberg. We were in a Capri, I think, with Rosberg. And it was a similar thing. Everything was just full lock. This way, this way. Montoya, drove an M3 with Montoya at Rockingham in the rain. But yeah, unbelievable car control. Incredible. Mr. Car Control. But, in terms of being a race driver who shortened his corners and drove with the front, Max is in another class, obviously. Not that I've ever driven with Max. Who else? Giancarlo Fisichella. I drove in a GT40 with Fisichella. Very good. Very, very fingertippy and neat and tidy. Jackie Stewart, several times with Jackie. Similar thing. And again, I've told the story, but one of the most memorable things that also actually was Niki Lauda. I drove with Niki. I actually raced with Niki in Brazil, in Rio, when the days when journalists were invited to do races with the Grand Prix drivers, and Niki and I shared a car. I started, then he took over. And that was fun. But what I remember about Niki, though, was when we did the trip down to Uruguay in his aircraft, which he flew with Marlboro. And I was on that promotional trip. And one night in Uruguay, after dinner, Niki gave me a lift back to the hotel, and he was in this rented VW Passat thing, sort of had a fastback shape to it. It wasn't a normal Passat, some Uruguay thing, running on, I don't know, alcohol, and manual transmission. It was about 5 years old. And Niki, and I don't know, I mean, it was just like every gear change was absolutely perfect. Clutch release was absolutely perfect. He barely looked at the road. He was looking side to side the whole time, and yet he knew exactly what was in front of him. It was amazing, Dennis Jenkinson came up with a word, which is the word actually that would have described what Max did in Miami, which is knowing the direction in which you're going, even when you're going round and round. You've still got to feel for the correct direction. It's a long word beginning with O, I think. Anyway, Niki was showing that to me inadvertently. I mean, he was looking at the sea, he was looking at the shop here, whatever. But everything was just so coordinated and smooth in this old VW Passat. Brilliant. Carlos was very good as well, very similar to that. Oh, and the other one was Michael, the famous Michael one. I was with Michael in some sort of Ferrari thing, and at Mugello, sitting next to Michael, and we're going through the fast S's down the hill, the fast bit. And he says, "Where's your photographer?" Meaning Darren Heath, who's going to take pictures of it. And as he does it, the back end of the car comes out, and he's doing we're doing like, I don't know, 90 miles an hour, I guess. And he says, "Oh, there he is over there." He's not even looking, just all peripheral vision. My favorite story was well, one of my other favorite stories was nothing to do with me, but as somebody with AJ Foyt doing a lap of Indy, and Foyt's driving around in some slushmobile going into turn 3, and there's a fly in the cockpit, in the cab, where they're sitting. And Foyt's driving into turn 3, and he just goes like that and catches the fly with his right hand. Peripheral vision. That's what it is. I love to see that. It's just another world. They're so good. And as critical as you may think I am of Colapinto or Stroll or any of those guys, believe me, even they would be magic to sit next to in a road car. Incredible. Sean Taylor. How interesting would it be going back to no rules for regulations, seeing the 6-tire cars, put the 6-wheel cars, I think you mean, put dimensions on how big the car can be, use whatever engine you want. Yeah, well, it would be incredibly difficult. It'd be incredibly nice and fun, but it would be difficult because everybody wants a different thing. Primarily, they all want lots of bodywork in which they can put the sponsors. That's the first thing. Then Liberty want all the big car companies in because they bring in lots of money. And then we want lots of close racing, so we don't want anybody having a big advantage, like a 6-wheel car or a fan car or any of that stuff. Active ride, ban it all. Not that the 6-wheeler, well, the 6-wheeler, 4 at the rear was a quick car, that's for sure. It never raced, obviously, but it would have been, definitely that's why it was banned. And so it goes on. Everybody has their own vested interests. And so we end up with what we've got. Compromise City, Montreal, Canada. Brandon Dukes. Hey, Peter, everything is about the V8 2031 regs, but what about the aero package? Yeah, well, it's not, don't assume that is done. It's not. Vegas application is just sent $14.99. Thank you so much. Very kind to do that. Very, very kind. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Review 07 Peter, Cam Chat, you said Lando burnt tires so he couldn't pass Kimi, but I saw analysis saying he had the best tire deg in Miami. If so, thoughts? Well, what analysis? That's all I can tell you. What analysis? How can you, how do they analyze that anyway? Is this from Pirelli telling us the details of the tire surface after the race? Or was this somebody looking at lap times and how they fell away or didn't? Be careful of that one. Absolutely for sure, Lando lost grip in the last 10 laps of the race. Why do you think he fell away from Kimi Antonelli? And that was overusing the tires. So be careful on what this analysis is. Analysis saying he had the best tire deg in Miami. Maybe over the 3 days, including the sprint race and qualifying, maybe, yeah, if you average it out, but not in the race, not when he was behind Kimi Antonelli. Anyway, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. Very good. I'd like to see that analysis. Swing Whip Golf. That's a good name. It's sad, but also thankful. I'm putting GT3 racing calendar on my phone. I think GT3 is good. It is good. We just need more Formula One drivers doing it now. That'll be it. They'll all be too scared to get beaten by Max now. That's the thing, isn't it? Swing Whip Golf says, big thing is everyone is racing. Formula One is politics. They're not in control. Yeah. Peter Hughes says, I thought Max drove like a loony on Sunday, dive bombing and shoving people off the road. Yeah, mega. Super Ferocious Ninja Warrior. Peter, could you have persisted more with the USF1 project? Is there any argument to be made that you pulled the plug too soon? Thanks. No, because the season is what it is. And if we couldn't make the crash tests, how could we go racing? Obviously, the minute we were given that deadline, in other words, we had to do everything in 6 months, I went straight to Max and said, Max, this is ludicrous. We need at least 18 months to do this. We need 18 months to do this well. We're going to do it well, and we'll do a good job. No, this is it now. Unless you can't make it, there are plenty of other teams that want to take your place. That was the response. And so what can we do? 6 months to do a factory car, the whole thing, forget it. And sure enough, they gave that 18 months to Haas. That was the thing that hurt more than anything, really. That not that don't feel bad for Haas at all. I just think they did it for them. Why didn't they do it with us? Hi, Peter. This is a lovely super chat as well. Thank you very much. Sadly, we just lost Alex Zanardi. Can you share any stories about him? My own personal relationship with Alex is nothing but smiles and laughter. I got to know him when he was first driving for Lotus through Peter Collins, who hired him, great believer in him, rightly so. And everything was a laugh. It was, unless you had a joke, you didn't waste time talking to him to tell. You didn't waste time talking to Alex. It's just the man you went to when you heard something funny. Where's Alex? I must tell him about that. And he would do the same in the back, in reverse. And he never lost that sense of humor, that humility when he had his accident. And I remember the day we heard he'd had the accident, and it was one of the terrible moments that we all experienced at the time. And we all assumed there was no chance that he was going to survive. And that he did was just, what's a story in its own right, isn't it? And I hope they make a movie about it. They really should. He and Billy Munger, two guys that you just have to be in awe of both of them. I am. And when he was at Williams, it was a difficult time. He never really got enough testing time with the carbon brakes and everything else that had changed, and he just ended up glazing the brakes most times, and Patrick ran out of patience. But I think he did very well financially out of it. I think Frank paid him off in full. But it was a sad thing because he was very quick in IndyCar. I mean, he was a very quick driver, Alex Zanardi, no doubt about it. And he just didn't do enough testing. And that wasn't his fault. It was just the way it went in terms of his IndyCar and Formula One schedules. So there you go. Francisco Bermejo. Max is the best and also quite a dirty driver. I don't think he is. I don't know why people say he's dirty. He's forceful. He's very forceful. And he makes the odd mistake like everybody. But in traffic, but he's not dirty. He doesn't just T-bone people off the track and close the door ridiculously. He just never gives up. And somebody passes him down the inside, he'll stay there on the outside and hold position for the next corner and just will not budge. And if that's dirty driving, then bring it on. Diamond Dog, good name, says take away all the driver aids and you'll see Max, Lewis and Kimi prove they are the best of this generation. Interesting to know which Kimi you mean there. Presumably you mean Antonelli, but maybe not. If you put, Gary Patrick says, if you put Max in the other Mercedes, we wouldn't be talking about Kimi. I'm not so sure you're right there. I think Kimi's getting pretty much the ultimate of that car. I'm not saying that he would beat Max, but I think he'd be near him. I think he would. I think he'd be very near him. And I think it'd be quite close. It'd be uncomfortably close from Max's point of view. He had to do that for a whole year. But yeah, Max obviously would fly in a Mercedes, no doubt about that. But nobody seems here. I'm surprised. Oh, here we go. Next one. Fire says, I agree the members only race chat was very cool. Thank you very much. But here's the next one I've been waiting for from Doc Drung. Russell no longer third best on the grid, ? I'm surprised that, there's talk about Montoya and Max and traffic and everything, all of which is not that important. We know how good Max is, and give me a break. He's unbelievably good in traffic as well. But what about George Russell getting blown away like this? And you're absolutely right. Where is Russell now? And of course, bear in mind, he could well win the Canadian Grand Prix. So that you can't just say, oh, that suddenly changes everything and he's back again. George is back. He will be quick in Canada, but it won't have solved the problem of why he was slow and beaten by Kimi in Miami. That's the point. Yeah, so we've had that one. Welcome to level 1. Since level 1, I've actually only got one level anyway, but it's just the way YouTube do it. A lot of people, YouTube channel operators, like to have 2 or 3 levels of membership, but I haven't really. I might have a bigger one in the future when I start to do some really well, say, start to do some unique content about various things that have happened in my life, going down that path. But at the moment, certainly for the foreseeable future, we're just going to have the one level. Vettel Hamilton has your name. Do you think Lewis Hamilton will finish his Ferrari contract until 28, or will he retire at the end of this year? Is it through to 28? Ferrari must be a bit. They signed him for that much? Wow, it's a big contract, isn't it? I think the question is whether Ferrari will want to pay him off or not, really, to be honest. I can't imagine Lewis, at the end of this year, if Lewis is about where he was last year, I just can't imagine he'll have the motivation to keep going. But then again, if he's getting paid that amount of money for the next 2 years till the end of 28, that is motivation, isn't it? So, I don't know. It's a good question, isn't it? Let's wait and see. I think he'll be quite near to Charles in Canada, but I don't think he'll be that near him in Monaco, for example. Connor Clark says he's going to Mondello Park this weekend to see Derek Daly drive a few of his old cars. Very good. And just a reminder that Derek's new book is coming out tomorrow, and you will enjoy, I'm sure you will enjoy seeing Derek do that, and he will enjoy it too. He'll love it. And he's a good man. When you see him, say you're a mate of mine, Connor, and he'll, I don't know what he'll do. But anyway, he's a good guy. Very good. You'll have a laugh with him. Max says, it's odd. It's like a track that challenges you, not has defeated you. I think we're talking about George and Miami. Luke, do you still think Sainz was crazy to go to Williams over Sauber? Yeah, absolutely. Because neither of them, he had no choice, did he? He didn't have a decent team to go to when Ferrari sacked him. All the good rides were taken. Red Bull didn't want him, presumably because of Max, I don't know. And so what was left? The only drive that made sense of what was left was Audi, the Sauber Audi, because at least it was Audi and it was a big badge and it was a future and it was a team that was basically rebooting and starting again. And as we know at the time, Jonathan Wheatley was there and he licked it into shape quite quickly, and Binotto is not bad either at doing what he's doing. Maybe Binotto and Carlos didn't get on. I don't know. But that to me would have been the right move. And he could have done it. I know he could have got that drive if he'd pushed for it alongside Nico Hulkenberg. And he didn't. He probably looked at the stats and thought, oh, Williams are better than Sauber. So why would I go to Sauber? No, I want to go there. Williams are better. Williams are on the rise. Look at Frank, Nigel, Alan Jones, all the great years. Yeah, Williams. Yeah, right. So I think he was crazy. Yep, still think that. Steve still plays games. Russell thought he'd walk his way to the title. Guess he never thought Kimi would be a problem. I think you're right. I think it's part of the other issue, isn't it? A lot of hay fever around today. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to sneeze. I think, or not. No, yes. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's right. It's another issue, isn't it? The fact that he isn't a short corner driver like Kimi. And on top of that, he never really worked at understanding why Kimi was quick anyway. And he's surprised that he is, for sure. And that's part of the problem. Sadal Kwayasaya. Hi, Peter. My belief is that the car order is Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and the driver order is the opposite. Max, Red Bull, Charles, Ferrari, McLaren drivers, and finally Mercedes drivers. I'd agree with all of that except Kimi. I would put Kimi ahead of both of the McLaren drivers. But apart from that, I think you're right. On the Limit 21, I thought one of your guests a couple of weeks ago, can't remember who it was, made the point about Formula One driver performance improvement is way behind other sports like tennis or golf. Yeah, that was Jock Clear. And he's right. And we'll see that. Jack and I will see that. My son, when we go up to the golf this weekend, because one of the things we're going to do is spend a lot of time watching him on the range, how they interface with the coach all the time. There'll be the swing coach, short game coach, putting coach. And the best golfers will have that, but not the drivers. Do you think George is going to anybody now for short corner turn-in coaching? I don't know. Biochem says, those passes of Max's aren't against the rules. Despite what people say, Max actually drives within the rules most of the time, right on that limit, but within it. Yeah, is it live for others? Well, I hope so. Nobody else seems to be saying no. There you are. Hey, Max. Hey, Miami. Both are massively talented. Both are ruthless. Hi, Peter. I noticed Oscar takes such long corners in Miami, noticeably when he was in front of Max Charles. The difference was so evident. Yeah. It's disappointing for me. I thought Oscar was coming out of the blocks as the old Oscar, having rebooted over the winter, having lost the championship to Lando, that this is his year and he's going to go back to being Oscar, who was starting to play around a lot with short corners and showing that he had the talent to do that. And then we get to Miami and he's just, very ordinary, in my opinion. Terminator says Montoya is working for a certain company and they all go hard on Max because he's been paid to do it. It's all propaganda against Max because his big name in Formula One going publicly hard on the new regs. Well, it's pathetic, isn't it? Absolutely pathetic. Watch Oscar rise. Yeah, I'm hoping, that this was just a one-off and Oscar will come back to being, but we're not going to see much of it in Canada anyway. I mean, Canada's Canada, but let's see how he goes in Monaco. Let's see if he can beat Lando at Monaco. That'll be an interesting one. Real test for Oscar's 2026 World Championship chances. Can he blow away Lando around Monaco? That's right. No, I've set that up now. Gary Patrick, wouldn't Max love to be behind that Mercedes at the moment? We can only dream and hope. Yeah, by the time he gets there, I don't think it'll be the same situation. But anyway, if he gets there at all. Faris Karadesh. Oh, we're talking about the GT3. Hi, Peter. How do you explain Pastor Maldonado winning the Spanish Grand Prix in 2012? Do you think something like that can happen this year, and who? Well, the Williams was, I mean, it's a cliche to say, but the Williams was a very good car that weekend and they got the tyres sorted and everything was right. But Pastor was not as slow as a lot of people like to say and not as bad as a lot of people like to say. And if you look at his Formula GP2 career or Formula 2 career, you'll see what I mean. The guy is quick. I've driven with him as well in a race car and he's very, very good. That's the first point. But nobody ever took him seriously or takes him seriously today, I think, which is a great shame. And then he found himself, the real point is why he didn't make a mistake under pressure with Alonso, the crowd favourite behind him, in a Ferrari at Barcelona. And he didn't, because he's pretty good, just kept his head down, stayed quiet, didn't allow anything to affect his concentration, just treated it like another stint and won the race. Good luck to him. I personally wasn't surprised because I always rated him as a driver. And I think then he went a little bit over the top. He was quick at Monaco, quick in Valencia from memory. And both occasions he kind of rushed things too much, didn't wait, lost his patience and hit things. And that was kind of the end of it. But for one weekend, he got the best from what was probably the best car. A lot of people thought the Williams was in very good shape that day. And he did get the best from it. Good on him. I like Pastor. He's a good bloke. And I was very embarrassed a couple of years later to be hosting a sponsorship event somewhere at Silverstone near Beckett's. And one of the Sky TV blokes came in to do some sort of talk or something. And when Pastor came around, he ridiculed Pastor Maldonado. It just made me think, I'd like to see you get in a race car, mate, and drive it. Thank you, when you're that critical. Anyway, I won't drop him in it. Kimi and Alonso as pundits will be top tier. Yeah, probably. I'm not sure Alonso would be, would he? As Alonso. I think Alonso's old enough, not old enough. Alonso's big enough and clever enough not to want to be a pundit. I think that's the thing about Alonso. He's a cool guy. Cool guys don't want to. Ex-Formula One drivers shouldn't be doing all that stuff anyway. What do they know about it? All they know about is their own little world in which they live. But they never looked at any of the other drivers to see what they were doing. Do you think Damon ever spent any time actually looking at the way Michael drove, or vice versa? Do you think Jenson Button actually looked at the way, Lewis braked in detail compared with him? No, they just did what they did, and when they were quicker, it was great. So that, drivers live in such a pigeonholed world that they're not very aware of what's going on at all. Nigel was the worst of it. Oh, there was a red car, a blue car. I don't know who's driving it. No idea. Brilliant. Um, Mr. Charles, I've always thought that having a minimum weight, maximum power output would be the best formula. Let the teams design freely within the budget cap, with exceptions of tyres and safety. You're absolutely right, mate. You know, because now we got the budget cap, there's no reason to have all these ridiculous rules. Get rid of MGUH, all that stuff, because we got the budget cap. You know, let the people be free and let them do what they want to do. But it'll never happen. Never happen. So there you go. Nick Macker says, love your reactions, Peter. Oh, well, thank you very much. I can only be what I am, you know. I've got a couple of good mates. And a few moments when I say, I'm a bit nervous about this. Yeah, just be yourself, Peter. You know, who cares? Just people care. I know that's the wrong thing, but you know, you can only say what you believe in, I think is the point, and not what other people are saying or what other people are trying to say. It's just what you feel from your gut on a sport like this. Deheb says, hi, Peter, big fan, long time listener. Thank you very much. Do you think Lewis is still using more short corners than last year based on the last two Grand Prix? I knew someone would ask that because there I was saying that he's doing a pretty good job. You know, to be honest, I didn't actually see much of him in Miami. They didn't show much of him, did they? You can't really tell that from the onboards. So, I don't know. Let me come back to you on that when we look at Canada. I think he'll be okay in Canada. I think he'll probably be pretty good through turn one. You know, he was always very good there in his peak days, years. Because I mentioned turn one in Canada because it's an interesting corner because it's quite a quick left-hander, quickish. And then you've got to be on the brakes pretty quickly for the tight right. And the tight right then leads on to quite a significant little bit of straight. And actually having good rotation there and getting the car straight as early as possible, extending the straight, accelerating down is a very important thing to do. And that change of direction between turn one and going into the tight braking of two is actually an area where a great short corner type driver can find a little bit of a neutral area for the car before he loads it up the other way. And it's a very, very small moment, but you'll see Max doing that really well. You'll see Charles doing that. Whether Lewis still has that, it'll be a bit of an acid test, I think. And that's where Kimi will be good now. I think Kimi will be very good out of one into two. He'll be asking less of the car probably than George. Let's watch. Certainly less than the two McLaren drivers will be asking. So Ryan Arnold, it's 4 a.m. my time. Sorry if this has already been asked. Can we get our hopes up for V8s in 21, 31, I think you mean, after Toto and the FA comments this week? You can get your hopes up, but be ready to be disappointed because the rules are not being defined by the FA president, and there's a very defined system of how it's all going to happen. But at least people are pushing in that direction. But it could have the opposite effect of very early on warning all the electric proponents and the big car company proponents of what they're facing, and they'll be mounting a massive counter strike to continue the current regulations with even more electrifications and bringing in some, you know, Chinese electric car companies. If we give them too much heads up warning, it's a bit like some other battle going on at the moment in the world. Max Flashart, sometimes these new low profile tires and mags don't make your car better on the road. Well, that's true. Canada is another sprint race. Yeah, it is. Yeah. No notification for super chats, sadly. Really? I've just called out several super chats. Hi, Peter. Do you think the problems at Aston are keeping Lawrence Stroll in Formula One longer, or will he get fed up and sell? Well, the whole motivation for Lawrence Stroll is to have his son win Grand Prix in the World Championship. So that's the only thing. That's the only reason he's doing this. So, you know, he's doing it behind a system now, which in theory will make him quite a lot of money, probably if he wants to sell the whole thing. But and that's always the worry. You know, when you put all your eggs into the basket of a guy who's only racing because he wants his son to be world champion, and you're Adrian Newey, you make sure that if he does pull out, you still own X% of the company and you've still got half a life to live. And that's what's going on there, I suppose. But I think, you know, there's enough promise still at Aston Martin, verbal, oral promise, not physical promise, of let's see how the car goes when we sort out all these issues with the battery overheating and the vibration from the engine, sort all that out, and let's then see where we're at. And if then the Adrian Newey car is not allowing Fernando Alonso to qualify easily Q1 and run up with the front, then I suppose he might then consider what's going on. Because I've done what everybody told me to do. I've got the best engineer, I've got the best this, best that, best engine guy. And look, going nowhere. As I say, it'll be up to what will drive him out of the sport sooner rather than later will be if Lance Stroll gets bored with the whole thing and decides, I've just had enough, I don't want to race anymore. Then Lawrence might do another year, but then I can't imagine he would stay in the sport. He just want to sell everything as quickly as possible and get out, I would imagine. So anyway, starting to near the end of this. What is it? Nearly 2 o'clock. We've been going on for too long, haven't we? It's 2 o'clock CET. Max says social media helps establish your name and brand, especially for funding. Yep, absolutely. Peter's going for 3 hours, says Drew. Yeah, thank you, sir, for all the work you do. Makes me love the sport more and more. Oh, thank you very much. It's very kind. BYD would be a disaster for Formula One. Get rid of electric. I think Lewis will make a big step in Canada. Unfortunately for him and Ferrari, they have an engine deficit issue relative to the Mercedes. Maybe. I think he'll go well in Canada. Does a driver know if his car is slow in pre-season testing before he sees the data from the other cars? Well, more than any other year, I think with this formula, it was difficult to judge where you were because they didn't even know what power they'd be harvesting until they got to Melbourne, did they? So everyone was looking at how you were managing the power in the Bahrain tests. So nobody had a real feel, I think. Love the channel, Peter. Thanks for your great work. Kimi was superb in Miami. The way he exited the chicane, getting the car so straight so early with a smooth throttle control, impressive. Alonso would just talk about how he could do better if he was if he was a pundit, I think is what you're trying to say. Max says, join the community to be a total legend. I think that's our community on this channel. Thank you very much for that, Max, because the community, I do post quite a lot there now. Not as much as I used to write. Well, it's about the same as I used to write columns for Autocar, I think, and F1, not F1 Racing, Autocar, which was a weekly. I had to write a column every week and features and race reports. So I'm kind of seeing it as like the old Autocar days. It's a marathon stream. We love it. And the reason it's going on is that I never really noticed the passing of time. It's all so much fun. Flimico, hi Peter, since the last race I have a strange feeling about Formula One. I'm watching Formula One for more than 20 years and I'm Italian, but I don't feel any emotions, although an Italian won. I felt empty after the race. Maybe it's because he drives a Mercedes and it's a fairly sort of vanilla-y, neutrally grey sort of team, isn't it? If he was in a Ferrari or a Racing Bulls or a Haas or something, you'd probably feel a little bit more emotional. But no, I know what. Do I know what you mean? I don't really, because I've never really been. In my whole life, I've never really gone down that whole patriotic bandwagon because I don't know why. I'm an Australian who lived in Europe and America, and I've managed drivers from all over the world, including England, obviously. And worked for British teams and an Italian team. So I don't, I'm not actually patriotic in that sense. I mean, patriotism I love, but I see Kimi as an amazing talent. I don't see him as an Italian amazing talent, if you see what I mean. I think George must work for his speed, where speed comes more naturally to Kimi. Yeah, but I don't think George thinks that. That's the point. And George has never had to work at it. He's always been mega quick and always been very good on tire management. He's never had an issue before. It's exactly the same as Alonso in 07. Magero stock. To me, you're the best and most engaging Formula One analyst. Your explanations are really excellent. That's why I've subscribed now. Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it. Hello from Austria. Thank you. Very kind. Russell, maybe another Ricciardo. Nothing special. It's not very kind to Daniel. Daniel was pretty special, actually, I think. I mean, he's softer, it's definitely softer, less spiky than George. And wow, was he good in traffic as well. Very good. Charles is vastly overrated. Really? Well, I think if you wanted to say he's the greatest racing driver in the history of the sport, that might be exaggerating a bit, but I don't think he's overrated if you say he's one of the top 3 drivers in the world at the moment. That's what I think anyway. I don't think that's overrating him. Max says, worth a watch as the cars have been fully restored. Oh, that's going back to Mondello Park, Ireland. What a place to be. So there we go. I think George would benefit from Rob's driver training, and I'd be willing to bet that George Russell's never even heard of Rob Wilson. So that ain't going to happen. Oh, here we go. There's the word I was looking for. It doesn't begin with an O. Proprioception. Thank you very much, CH3MG33K. That is what Max Verstappen displayed in spades when he held that 360 on the opening lap. It was proprioception. And Dennis Jenkinson once wrote a complete article about that and how a great racing driver, in the days when they used to do a lot more than just one 360, they'd do 5 or 6 of them, would know exactly when to touch the brakes and exactly when to give it a bit more steering. Thank you. Very good. Excellent. That's why I love these live streams. Max Flashout. A Capri like the professionals? Were you Bodie or Doyle? Yeah, well, that's right. It was a Capri. In the days when Capris were very cool cars. 3-litre Capri as well. Yeah, mega. Bodie or Doyle? Well, yeah. Yeah, they were good, weren't they? Was that Smart Race Management by Lando? Was it Smart Race Management by Lando just to sit 1 second behind Kimi and wait for him to crack? But the youngster kept his cool. No, it wasn't. It was very unsmart, and that's not what great pushy racing drivers do. They, you know, if you think, and in my experience, Nigel, Max, you know, to name but two, Gilles Villeneuve, another, you know, you catch somebody, you don't faff around. You've got 1 lap and you do it. It's just like, you know, when a bug hits your visor and you've run out of tear-offs, you've got 30 seconds to get rid of it. Otherwise, once it's there, it's gone. You know, if you don't do that, it's going to be there forever, you know, like that. And it's the same when you catch somebody, right, got him, bang, next corner, go. I'm boss here. That's what Max does. So there you go. Max says, I love these memories, told us stories. Oh, well, I love telling them to you guys because, you know, there's so much enthusiasm and that's always good. So thank you very much, everybody. Any other questions just come up? Proprioception is like 1,000,000 points in Scrabble. Yeah, I bet it would be. Do you think drivers should rely on simulators or just go for the natural feel instinct when preparing for Grand Prix weekends like Alonso or Lewis in the past? Simulators always very, very good for procedural stuff in the cockpit, feel for the circuit, coming out of the garage, whatever it is, all the stuff on the steering wheel, excellent. Touch and feel, forget it. Don't even think about relying on a simulator for that because there's never been a simulator built that would even get close to simulating the real feel of driving a racing car. So the good ones use the simulators very well. I mean, Nico Rosberg used to dress up in his proper race kit with the helmet, everything, and then get the temperature turned up absolutely maximum just to train for the hot races. And I'm sure a lot of the drivers do that today. Nico is probably the first to do that. Nothing wrong with that either. That's good. But actually touch and feel, no. It's been nothing but confusing, I would have thought. I think the greats are the ones who realize you can always improve, not just the car, which I think Max versus Hamilton difference is. Hamilton probably strives more for physical improvements and car. Yeah, that's right. You know, you've got to be self-critical. And if you're not self-critical, you stagnate and then you go backwards when a young guy like Kimi comes into the other car. And, you know, sometimes you can't be self-critical if you're just winning races and things are going well. But that's when the real skill comes in, still looking at ways you can improve and wondering whether or not you're doing the same as the best driver in the world would do if he was in your car. And, you know, be humble about that and think about, are you supple enough? Are you turning in early enough? Are you extending the straights both ways? And I think it's very difficult if you're winning races and the engineers are telling you maximize this, maximize that, then still to be self-critical. That's one of the problems in Formula One. So have I ever driven a V8 M390? No, I haven't, actually. Sorry. I've got a Skoda Rally 2 with the ABT power upgrade and Hyundai i20N, which I love. They're quick enough for me, really. And I tend to drive them on, you know, tight, twisty Spanish roads in the mountains. And when I'm on a motorway, I tend to just want something very quiet and very you know, just put it under cruise control. So I think the review says, I think Formula One drivers are too proud to seek help from Rob. Part of it makes them great. Part of it makes them prone to lack of progress. Look at Lawson, Sonoda. Yeah, that's right. I mean, the great ones, of course, could always benefit from Rob, but I don't think it's a problem if they don't go to somebody like Rob, because by definition, they wouldn't be great if they weren't self-critical anyway. So they're looking at ways that within themselves they can improve, and usually they can adapt pretty well to what they need to do. Max says Daniel was special in many ways. He was. He's very, very good. Am I going to the Goodwood Festival of Speed? No plans at the moment, unless it's suddenly very easy to get in and out, and not many people there, and very easy to look at all the cars and talk to everybody. If it's that, as it was in the old days, I'll definitely be there. But if it is what it is, unbelievably crowded, difficult. I mean, I'm flying to England from Spain at the moment. It's a bit of a pain as well. So it's got to be a good reason to go anywhere now, to be honest. To go to Europe, somewhere else. Sorry, to go from here to England. It's got, you know, elsewhere, no problem. Max always thinks he can be better, which is why he beats others by 20 seconds. Absolutely right. Remember when Nigel went round Senna on the outside of the Parabolica? That was real racing. Yeah, it was. And as I keep saying, around Berger, around the outside of Piratella at Mexico, that was real racing. And just a reminder on that race, at the end of it, Prost came down, and everybody sort of looked at him. And then Nigel came down, and the entire pit lane was looking at Nigel, clapping him, including the McLaren boys. That's real racing. I think we should end on that one, isn't it? It's a bit of an emotional moment, that one, I think. Nigel Mansell, wow. What a driver. I was so lucky to get to know him so early, and to be, you know, dare I say, a part of his racing life for a long time. And that was a great thing. Just lucky, really. Lucky. Really enjoyed every millisecond of it and learned a lot. There we go. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks to Jetcraft, OEM Exclusive, TrackNinja, and of course REC Watches for their ongoing support of this channel. Brilliant to have them as partners. And of course, Alpine Stars, and a few others as well in the background. Thank you very much for that. Don't forget the Derek Daily book, which is coming out tomorrow. I think everyone will love that. And in the meantime, thank you. Because, I mean, how many shows are there in the world like this where without any guests, we can have all this interplay all the time, you know, with lots of great points and questions. And that's, you know, I don't know. I think it's probably quite unusual, actually, but it's brilliant. I love it. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Take care. Have a good day. Have a good evening, wherever you are in the world. See you soon.